Master, what I am asking is about your past. Master Mingjing was momentarily stunned, and Qinya even noticed the glimmer of tears forming in her eyes. She shook her head, her voice trembling as if she wished to deny something while desperately trying to cling to it. No, before I renounced the world, I did not know any Master Korwa. I only knew Yun Wangshu. Even this renunciation is merely an act of self-deception, she said through clenched teeth, trembling lips revealing her contempt for others while simultaneously loathing her own insignificance. What a farce this is. Chapter 15. The first time I encountered him was in my home garden, standing beside a peony, though I found the flower's hue too pale. I admired him as I grew, yearning to become his bride, yet he left without a glance back. Master Mingjing suddenly grew agitated, as if the weight of the past pressed heavily upon her heart, locking away years of youth and all her emotions and fervor. Qinya, do you know? I have lost myself. I lost myself the moment I left home for him. I became ensnared. I do not believe in this Buddha. I do not wish to practice this Buddhism. I do not want to recite endlessly before a clay statue of the Buddha. With her eyes closed and head tilted back, a solitary tear trickled down her cheek, hidden among her hair. Master Mingjing clutched her ever-present prayer beads tightly, her gaze fixed on the window as if she could see the haunting figure of that unforgettable person beyond it. Yun Wangshu, look, after more than 30 years, I find that I can even hate you. What a farce indeed. The obsessions of those memories, the madness and passion, all seemed ruthlessly ground to dust by time, leaving only the most resilient fragments behind. Qinya's eyes widened in disbelief as she sat there, unsure of what words could possibly comfort the master. Or perhaps the master required no consolation, she simply needed a listener. 36 years ago, Master Mingjing was but a young girl, delicate as snow, with a gentle grace, engaged in a match of equal social standing since childhood. The young man was as gentle as water, clear as jade. Yet now, Master Mingjing bore the marks of time, her features worn, her hair a shade of gray, her heart heavy with sorrow. Noticing the change in her expression, Qinya hurriedly embraced her, saying, "Master, do not dwell on it, do not dwell on it." She continued to comfort her, and after a while, Master Mingjing fell into a drowsy slumber in her arms. The daytime winds of Shuangyan Mountain were always gentle, reluctant to unleash their full strength, much like a delicate woman who playfully teases, igniting your desires while slipping through your fingers, leaving you in frustrated longing. At night, however, the winds transformed, fierce and relentless, akin to a warrior laying siege, attacking with a merciless ferocity. "The wind is strong outside, come in for a cup of tea." Master Korwa sat cross-legged before a low table, earnestly brewing tea. The person outside curled their lip, but ultimately opened the door to the room and stepped inside obediently. Upon seeing her enter, Master Korwa teased with a smile, "Are you planning to become a thief, practicing here first?" Qinya shyly tugged at her dark clothing. "I've just been reading too many stories." "Ah, Qinya, you are always so forthright." Master Korwa shook his head, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "Is being forthright not good?" "No, it is indeed good. I simply fear I might have nothing to respond with." Master Korwa poured a cup of tea and placed it before her. Qinya cradled the teacup, slowly spinning it in her hands, remaining silent, while Master Korwa also fell into a quiet reverie, both of them engulfed in stillness. After a long pause, Qinya could no longer contain herself. "Master, the master is gravely ill. Will you not go to see her?" Master Korwa paused in his tea-drinking, shaking his head with a sigh. "There is no need." His response was as light as a feather. Qinya, enraged, stood up, gritting her teeth as she glared at him. "Master, she has waited her entire life for you." "Umitba, I have advised her for a lifetime as well." Master Korwa shook his head, feeling powerless. "When she renounced the world, I told her there was no need for such attachment." Understanding and enlightenment require one's own cultivation. Regardless of how much others say, it only serves to stoke the flames. Thus, he could not meet her, and she dared not confront him. "Oh!" Xinya cried out, clutching her head in distress. "Master, why did you choose to renounce the world?" After a while, Xinya glared at him with bitterness. Master Kurwa was momentarily taken aback, retracting his outstretched hand meant for the cup, leisurely twirling his prayer beads. After a prolonged silence, he finally spoke. "Shall I tell you a story? About 40 years ago, there was a young man born into a prestigious family, skilled in martial arts and well-versed in literature. He had a match of equal social standing, a young woman who was both intelligent and beautiful, truly a favored son of fortune. One day, he went hunting with a few friends but accidentally fell into a ravine, trapped for 3 days. When he finally managed to escape and returned home, he discovered that his grandfather, aged and nearing his end, and his nephew, barely over 100 days old, were both gone. They were dead. He uttered these words coldly, like a sword of wrath, chilling those who heard it to the bone. Xinya shivered, feeling the temperature in the room plummet even colder than the night winds. Xinya's eyes widened in shock as she stared at Master Kurwa, who bore no trace of emotion on his face, his eyes deep and somber like the ocean. She felt a jolt in her heart, as if plunged into icy waters, and it took her a moment to muster the courage to ask, "Why?" "Indeed, why?" Master Kurwa echoed, closing his eyes as if recalling the scene. He could still vividly remember the blood-soaked ground and lifeless bodies. It was truly a nauseating red. For years thereafter, he could not dare to close his eyes, fearing the sight of bloodied family members. He even avoided visiting graves, unwilling to accept the truth, repeatedly pinching himself, questioning which was the true nightmare. He concealed his identity and practiced martial arts, yet he did not know who his enemies were. Until one day, he discovered something at the home of his former friends. They claimed to have obtained a divine iron, intending to forge it into a weapon, inviting heroes from all corners to witness. Isn't it laughable? That was still a family friend, and he still called them uncle, a brother he had grown up with. Excusing their actions by saying that the Yun family had been exterminated. "I had perished at the bottom of the ravine, and everything belonging to the Yun family had been usurped by him, all while vowing to avenge the Yun family. Even his fiancée was taken from him. 38 years prior, that beggar-like youth squatted before the Qi family's gate, watching as guests flooded in, listening to their wealth and success. That had once been his home, now irrevocably changed overnight. He believed there was no longer a Yun Wangshu in the world, yet he did not realize there was a girl stubbornly waiting for him. She could recognize me just by a fleeting glance when I was a beggar. Was he moved? Did his heart ache? Did he love? He dared not think or answer. What happened next? Xinya felt as if she might explode with anger. If that loathsome person stood before her, she would surely turn him into mincemeat. What happened next? Master Kurwa closed his eyes. 40 years ago, the Yun family of Jiangnan obtained a piece of divine iron, yet they did not foresee the calamity that would befall them. The Qi family, their family friends, had the eldest son orchestrate the fall of the Yun family's second son, Yun Wangshu, into the ravine, and that very night, upon delivering the news, they exterminated the entire family, plundering their assets. A total of 102 souls from the Yun family perished without exception. 2 years later, Yun Wangshu's fiancée was betrothed to the Qi family's youngest son. 6 months later, she was formally married, and they invited heroes from across the land to witness the divine iron they had obtained, preparing to forge it into a formidable weapon. On the eve of the wedding, the Qi family was exterminated. Blood was used to write on their door, stating that today, they returned the favor for the annihilation of the Yun family. "I poisoned half of the water at the Qi family," Master Kurwa said with a tragic smile. Xinya was at a loss, unsure whether to congratulate him or to express condolences. The so-called half-poison is harmless when used alone, but when combined with other conflicting substances, it becomes lethal. That night, I lost control, seizing the opportunity before they drew their last breaths. As he recalled the sight of the toddler taking its first steps, his hand, poised with a knife, hesitated. At that moment, the head of the Chi family pleaded with me, for that was his eldest son's son, only asking for his life to be spared. In that instant, I envisioned my nephew, barely 100 days old, his small body with half his head severed. Tears streaming down my face, I smiled and asked him why he could not spare another's life, why he could not let another go. The suffering he endures today is merely the consequence of the seeds you sowed in the past. Master Korwa murmured a Buddhist chant softly. Amitabha.
I remain unable to forget the eyes of that innocent child, as clear as the springs in the mountains and as radiant as the stars in the night sky. Yet at that moment, he seemed possessed, wielding a knife with wild abandon. By the time I regained my senses, the room was stained crimson with blood. Master Kuroyong kept his eyes tightly shut, his eyelids trembling, and even today, he still cannot find peace. I do not know how many lives I have taken. All I am aware of is that on that fateful night, I swung 3 blades, thud. Chinya's heart skipped several beats in fright. It was only later that I learned many were hired for a wedding procession. Master Kuroyong clasped his hands together. Amitabha, what a grave sin. I have harmed many innocent lives. Each day, I question myself. Can my heart find solace? Although I have avenged myself, I have also made numerous enemies. Round and round it goes. How shall I repay their debts? That young woman is pure and bright. How could she possibly descend into this quagmire alongside me? Chinya sighed, her face contorted in anguish, slumping her shoulders. But the master has already sunk into the mire. Indeed, my transgressions have merely multiplied. Thus, I have confined myself in these Shuangyan mountains for a full 30 years. Since I cannot offer her companionship, then merely gazing at one another shall suffice. The ginkgo tree, a mere 10 paces from the door of the side room, rustled in the night wind. Chinya, feeling agitated, tugged at her hair, wondering who to blame. It seemed there was no one to hold accountable. This sensation made her exceedingly irritable, as if she were compelled to wield a kitchen knife and slash about indiscriminately. In the shadows, a figure lurked stealthily, peering around, seemingly up to no good. Chinya fixed her gaze upon him, observing as he circled twice before squatting down, clutching his head, apparently trembling. Hey! Chinya approached and tapped his shoulder. Why are you lurking about in the dead of night? Preparing to haunt us? Shusheng jumped in fright, nearly leaping up to scream, but Chinya quickly covered his mouth. Hush, do you still wish to take your medicine? Shusheng gazed at her with a pitiful expression. That little look was almost unbearable for the self-proclaimed cold-hearted Chinya. Reluctantly, she released her grip, casting him a sidelong glance, her tone low and tinged with sarcasm. What, are you planning to flee? Chinya stood under the moonlight, enveloped in a chilling aura. Shusheng, still bent over adjusting the collar she had disheveled, paused his movements at her words, raised his head to look at her earnestly, and asked solemnly, Do you think I am foolish in your eyes? Chapter 16. Chinya bowed her head, deep in contemplation. Soon, a cup of tea's worth of time passed, yet Chinya remained silent, prompting Shusheng to reflect. Am I truly that foolish? I believe you are not foolish, but rather, simple-minded. At last, Chinya, her face serious, declared this. Shusheng silently stared at her for a few moments before turning on his heel to walk away. Hey! Chinya hurriedly chased after him. Scholar? 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 Scholar, if you take one more step. Do you believe I? She clenched her fist and struck her palm with great force, then slowly made a grinding motion. Shusheng shivered, contemplating for a moment, ultimately standing his ground, head held high, refusing to acknowledge her. Chinya circled around him, puzzled, saying, I find it strange. Was it not you who asked me? Did I err in my response? I asked whether you were foolish, and you replied with simple-minded. Shusheng maintained his gaze straight ahead, his words laced with indignation. Chinya scratched her head. Is there a difference? Don't they convey a similar meaning? Shusheng stared at her, retorting. Just like pork, does front elbow meat equate to pig head meat? They are not the same. How can they be the same? Chinya answered decisively, shaking her head emphatically. Indeed, how can they be the same? Shusheng regarded her with a somber expression. Although they may convey a similar notion, there is nonetheless a distinction between elbow meat and pig head meat. Chinya maintained a stern faade, suppressing a smile. My apologies, you are neither foolish nor simple-minded, merely a bit naive. Shusheng reluctantly found comfort in her words. So, are you planning to sneak away? I am not foolish enough to confuse kindness with malice. When he awakened in the dark, feeling light and invigorated, he realized he had misjudged the situation. What are you doing wandering about in the dead of night? And what of you, roaming the mountains at such an hour? Chinya pondered for a moment before responding earnestly. I suppose I am simply indulging in excess after a hearty meal. Shusheng, with a blank expression. I cannot control my feet when I am hungry. His face bore a look of deep sorrow, akin to one recently abandoned. Oh, so it is hunger. Chinya nodded. Let us go. Where to? It is pitch black. Don't wander off. Be cautious of encountering wolves. Shusheng followed closely behind, his voice laced with anxiety. If we encounter wolves, as long as they are not in packs, it should be safe. Right? True. Following someone skilled in martial arts should ensure safety on this front. Shusheng ceased his complaints about the darkness, hurriedly trailing behind her. What do you want to eat? Chinya boldly gestured towards the darkened forest. Encouraging him to choose freely. It feels like a banquet. Shusheng's eyes lit up with excitement. Rubbing his hands together, and with a hint of worry, he inquired, At this late hour, can we catch anything? No worries, I know where their lair is. Very well, heroine. You are impressive. Just a roasted chicken, perched on a tree, Chinya asked. How much do you want? Half a chicken perhaps. In truth, he was hungry enough to consume a whole one. But would eating too much lead to a beating? Eating so little, no wonder he had only a couple of pounds of flesh on his chest. As she spoke, she leaped down, falling gracefully like a leaf among the withered foliage. Making no sound why meager flesh is a bother to her. Shusheng squatted on the branch, one hand holding a lantern, the other absently touching his chest, muttering in dissatisfaction. Once again, with the comments about my meager figure. Does she think I am a pig? With your kind of pig, you'd be bankrupt. Soon, Chinya returned, holding a vine, from which hung 2 wild chickens with their necks twisted. Shusheng stared in disbelief. How did you return so quickly? This speed is astonishing. Did she merely go to sip tea? Chinya, what else did you expect? Speak. Would you prefer soup or roasted? Shaking the 2 chickens, Chinya indicated her hunger. Roasted, bleeding, plucking, cleaning, Shusheng squatted nearby, trembling as he held a lantern. Watching Chinya deftly gut and prepare the birds, his legs growing weak. Heroine? Are you in a bad mood today? Chinya paused her actions, tilting her head, staring into space, lost in thought. After a moment, she turned to Shusheng, noticing the 4 characters on his face, filled with dread, and could not help but chuckle. Rest assured, no matter how bad it gets, I will not use you to sharpen my kitchen knives. Shusheng visibly relaxed, but he quietly added, Of course, if you provoke me, I will not hesitate to strike. Heh. When it came time to eat, Shusheng could not control himself, gnawing on chicken bones, eyeing the remaining half of the chicken with reluctance. Chinya, happily chomping on a bone, noticed and began to advise. Eating too much at this hour is bad. It will lead to indigestion. Shusheng silently shifted his gaze to the pile of bones on the ground. What are you staring at? Be careful, or I will throw you out to feed the wolves. I have suddenly realized that you, young lady, possess quite a bit of charm. Shusheng spoke earnestly, though if one overlooked his lingering gaze on the chicken leg in Chinya's hand, it would have been more convincing. Chinya was taken aback, completely unprepared for his bold remark. This scholar has an unusually thick skin. I find it hard to counter such a remark. The principle of observing beauty beneath the lantern applies equally by the firelight. Shusheng nodded solemnly. Enough. I'm intimidated. Chinya reluctantly offered the half-chicken, and Shusheng hesitated before asking. You won't retaliate afterward, will you? Well, it's hard to say. I tend to hold grudges. She glared at him with a mischievous smile, her presence in the dark woods becoming increasingly ominous. Shusheng's hair stood on end, glancing between the roasted chicken and Chinya, resolutely shaking his head, firmly refusing. No, eating too much at night will lead to indigestion. Tears streamed down his heart, biting his fingers in despair. Martial prowess was too much of a burden. Just eat. Chinya extended a chicken leg towards him. Shushing hesitated, watching her until Chinya grew impatient, at which point he quickly snatched it. The first thing he did was lick it, just in case Chinya changed her mind. Can you not embarrass yourself? Chinya couldn't help but think that his actions resembled those of a dog. I thought you were past being surprised by such things, Shushing mumbled through a mouthful of chicken. Chinya, her patience wearing thin, shouted in frustration. Every time you seem a bit more agreeable, you just have to challenge my limits. Don Tu, do you believe we are that close? Why should I be unfazed? Shusheng, chewing on a chicken leg, stared blankly at her, not understanding why she suddenly erupted in anger, her expression akin to someone throwing a tantrum. Chinya felt utterly exhausted. The next morning, as Chinya chopped wood, each swing of the axe made Shusheng flinch. With a crack, the wood split in two, and as Chinya paused, her tone serious and her expression weary, she asked, "Can you please stop flinching?" Shusheng set down the wood and looked up at her with a plaintive expression. I don't want to either, but it is just so timid. Indeed, just like you. I possess a timid disposition. Chiba nodded earnestly. Well, aren't my legs just as timid as I am? Shusheng swiftly retreated while swinging his axe. If they weren't timid like me, it would surely be haunted. Chiba glanced at her sideways, then suddenly set down the axe and sat upon a large stone used for grinding wheat. She patted the space beside her, inviting Shusheng to sit. Do you know? Chiba turned her head, her eyes gleaming mischievously as she gazed at him. Did I mention that my family once kept a few chickens? Shusheng quietly regarded her for a moment, responding with an answer that strayed from the topic. Chiba, perplexed, could not comprehend how the conversation had shifted to chickens. One night, I got up to use the restroom and saw a weasel stealing a chicken. Its eyes were just like yours, gleaming and radiant. As Shusheng spoke, he gestured with his hands, fearing Chiba might not believe him, and he vigorously nodded to affirm the credibility of his words. Chiba's gaze flickered, and with a grin revealing her teeth, she remarked in a chilling tone, I forgot to mention that behind the guest room where you reside lies a cemetery. Shusheng's eyes widened in alarm. You don't scare me like that. When I was young, I heard tales of someone who specifically went there to hang themselves. With so many buried, there's bound to be some discord. Shusheng began to sweat profusely, his hands clenched into fists. So, if you hear anything at night, do not panic, Chiba kindly warned him. How could one not panic? Shusheng glared at her indignantly, his face flushed, eyes shimmering with tears. Please don't scare me to tears. Chiba worried he might burst into tears at any moment. Shusheng stubbornly held his neck high. No, it's nothing. Those who do not commit wrongdoings need not fear ghosts knocking at their doors. What you speak of is merely an ordinary ghost. Chiba, animated, began to elaborate. There are 3 types of ghosts. What? There are different kinds? Shusheng's watery eyes widened in disbelief, his body starting to tremble slightly as he internally shouted, I wish to know none of them. He wanted to flee, yet his legs felt weak, and Chiba's words unwittingly drifted into his ears, each syllable crystal clear. The first type is timid, naturally cowardly, and fearful of people. Such ghosts generally avoid human contact. The second type is, if I do not provoke you, you do not provoke me. We coexist peacefully, but should you offend it, it will surely bring about either death or injury. The third type is the ferocious and malevolent kind. Either they are violent and brutal in life, or were timid and fearful, yet upon death, their personalities reverse, wreaking havoc without remorse, their rage unleashed. The first 2 types are manageable, but one must fear encountering the last kind. Chiba shook her head, expressing both disgust and disdain. Whether it be ghosts or humans, they will eliminate you at the slightest displeasure. After a pause, she turned her head. Aren't you unconcerned? Shusheng, trembling with chattering teeth, clung tightly to her arm, stammering. Unconcerned is only in regard to the first and second types. But against the third type, it is of no use, by the end. His voice was laced with a hint of impending tears. Oh. Chiba nodded faintly. A scholar. You understand the differences between men and women, do you not? You may as well consider me forgetful, Shusheng mumbled. It was you who frightened me first. I did not frighten you. You know. Chiba's dark brows arched, her almond eyes calm as the deep sea, because I truly witnessed it. The phrase I saw a ghost with my own eyes echoed incessantly in his ears, sending a shiver down his spine. making him wish he could meld into her. Chapter 17. You must be deceiving me, right? Shusheng gazed at her with hopeful eyes, his emaciated chest pressed against her arm. His bones aching painfully, Chiba furrowed her brow, wondering how this person had managed to survive to such an age in such a frail state. Why would I deceive you for no reason? As soon as she spoke, he trembled even more, and she could hear the sound of his teeth chattering in her ear. Woe is me, perhaps you are seeking revenge for me stealing your chicken leg last night. His eyes, glistening like those of a newborn creature, were pure and naive, both depending on her yet cautiously protective. Perhaps you are avenging my comment about you resembling a weasel. At her remark, Shusheng felt a chill creeping up his spine. As though something loomed behind him, Chiba couldn't help but smile, though she admitted, while you guessed correctly, I truly did not deceive you. The first part of her statement eased Shusheng's heart, while the latter sent chills down his spine, making him look at her with a pitiful gaze. Yes, I might not be a proficient master, but I excel at catching ghosts and exorcising evil. Deceiver. The words were etched across Shusheng's face. Isn't a monk the most adept at chanting scriptures? Who said that ignorance equates to being a monk? The ignorant master is, after all, a Taoist. Shusheng felt dizzy. There is a Taoist in the monk's temple. Are you certain you are not jesting with me? If you don't believe me, you can ask Master Korong. Master Korong would never lie. She spoke earnestly, and Shusheng couldn't help but gaze upon her. His round eyes reminiscent of a rain-soaked sky, captivated by her beauty. A gentle breeze passed, lifting a strand of her hair, brushing against his cheek, tickling him subtly. No matter how he scratched, the itch remained unrelieved. While the sound of her strong heartbeat echoed, thump, thump, creak. A sudden gust of cold wind. A ghost? Shusheng felt as if pricked by needles, instantly leaping onto Chiba, clinging to her while shivering and shouting, Heroine, please save me. Chiba stared blankly at the temple door ahead, and at the astonished monk. She pondered seriously how she had developed such compassion for this fellow. Omitba. The monk hurriedly bowed, repeatedly apologizing. It seems I have interrupted your romantic rendezvous. Truly a sin, a transgression. His youthful voice, uttering words far beyond his years, bore large, round eyes that seemed to stick to them. Chiba glared in frustration. Why didn't you excuse yourself? With a swift motion, she attempted to pry off the person clinging to her. And you, scholar, could you not display some backbone? What use is backbone against a ghost? Shusheng gazed at her earnestly. Simultaneously, the monk pouted. Since we collided, shouldn't it be you two who avoid suspicion? All of you, be gone, Chiba shouted in anger. Embarrassed and furious, the monk shook his head and sighed. Practitioner, restrain your anger, refrain from wrath. Shusheng nodded in agreement. Chiba, anger is detrimental to one's health. If you two don't vacate the premises, you might as well remain silent. I will not permit you to speak unless questioned. Chiba raised her axe and struck the large stone, embedding the axe half an inch deep, successfully silencing the two. The large and small figures nodded silently, indicating their compliance. Chiba's anger subsided somewhat. Monk, pray tell, what brings you here? I have come to scrounge a meal. The young monk replied with great melancholy. My master does not wish to cook today, so you understand. He conveyed a knowing look. With a master who occasionally acts capriciously, the young monk found himself quite troubled. But what if I do not wish to cook either? Chiba propped her chin thoughtfully. The monk and Shusheng exchanged glances, bewildered as to why those who could cook seemed to enjoy striking. Are you jesting? Chiba asked earnestly. Very serious. The monk nodded, pulling out his wooden fish, sitting cross-legged, and began. Namo, Hiluotana, Duoluya. Namo, Aliya. Palujeti. Shuabo Luoyi. A swarm of flies buzzed around her ears, and Chiba covered her ears, wishing to toss him out. Shusheng, aghast, watched Chiba's forehead vein bulge, contemplating whether to pull the young monk away. Are you leaving or not? Chiba pointed at him, her eyes ablaze. Aliyi. The monk continued reciting the scriptures, perhaps having not memorized them all, so he kept repeating the same passage, causing Chiba's frustration to escalate. Chiba? Suddenly, Master Mingjing appeared at the door of the guest room, and upon witnessing this scene, she paused in surprise, then smiled warmly. Where did this little monk come from? Master, why are you up? Are you hungry? Chiba swiftly stepped forward to support her, relieved to see her in good spirits. Her eyes softened. Even the monk's incessant chanting became somewhat pleasant. I am not a pig. I eat and sleep, wake and eat. Hearing the commotion outside, I came to take a look. The elderly Master Mingjing still possessed a certain grace even in her laughter. Ba, this little monk is from the nearby Shuang temple, named Bugu. The round-eyed young monk performed a proper bow. Bugu, I do not understand. Master Mingjing gazed blankly, her eyes misty, and she widened her eyes. I still have unfinished tasks. You may carry on with that. She hurriedly departed. After closing the door, tears suddenly fell from Master Mingjing's eyes. Chiba's hand remained suspended in the air, while the master had already shut her door to guests. She looked at Bugu, suddenly understanding, and approached, tugging at the young monk's ear, gritting her teeth. Enough, little troublemaker, you're quite clever. I shall take you down the mountain for a meal. How does that sound? Though surprised by Master Mingjing's attitude, Bugu was more concerned about descending the mountain, hastily picking up his wooden fish and urging. Then let us hurry. Shusheng squatted in a corner by the temple door, gazing at the sky with a sigh. I am so hungry, starving to the point of weakness in my limbs and dizziness in my head. He unsteadily stood, tightening his belt a little, muttering to himself, this should suffice to stave off hunger, right? Chiba felt an inexplicable surge of anger, and without hesitation, she kicked out and exclaimed, can you not always wear that pitiful expression as if I were mistreating you? If one were unaware, they might think I owe you something. With a thud, Shusheng collapsed to the ground, utterly motionless. Chiba hesitated, pondering whether she had truly knocked him unconscious. Yet, she hadn't exerted that much force. As she circled him, hands clasped behind her back, the demeanor of a high monk emerged. Ah, this bookworm certainly does not appear to be one destined for longevity. I was right in my assumption. Perhaps I possess some talent for divination after all. He chuckled to himself, squatting down, and added, fear not, bookworm. I shall ensure your spirit is guided. Chiba sighed wearily and approached the fidgeting monk. Be quiet. If you utter another word of your nonsense, I shall strip you bare and hang you from a tree. My dear lady, you cannot despair of being unmarried to such an extent. The monk gazed at her with tearful eyes, hands clutching his chest. His large orbs accusingly fixed upon Chiba, the enchantress. You shall face retribution. I have already faced it. Chiba shouted at the motionless Shusheng on the ground. If you do not rise soon, I shall take my leave. No sooner had she spoken than Shusheng sprang up with agility, standing tall before her and clinging tightly to her arm, pressing against her side. Chiba, now numb to the absurdity, asked, what are you doing? Is it truly necessary to be so close? She could even detect the scent of soapberry on him. I can no longer walk. You must use your lightness of feet to carry me down. Must your audacity know no bounds? Chiba thought to herself, feeling as though she had saved nothing but a burden. At the corner of the alley in Lucien, the monk tugged at Chiba's garment. Worry etched across his face. Did you truly bring silver? Of course, Chiba replied. If it is insufficient, you must leave the bookworm behind. Do not abandon him, Chiba retorted. It was merely that one time. Must you remind me of it for eternity? Chiba's expression turned frosty. Could you refrain from constantly mentioning my past misdeeds? Are you eating or not? Yes, yes. The monk's mouth watered at the thought. At the tavern, a man, a woman, and a young monk drew the gaze of many patrons. It was only after the trio entered a private room that the attention lessened significantly. Chiba ordered an abundance of dishes in one breath, nearly reciting half the menu, causing the waiter to stare in disbelief. He hesitated. Once ordered, the items cannot be returned. Eating without paying will bring consequences. With a swift motion, Chiba produced a pouch and scattered a few taels of silver onto the table, flinging the smallest piece at him. Bring the dishes quickly. Certainly, I shall serve the dishes at once. The waiter's eyes lit up, and he hurriedly complied. It appears you truly have brought silver. I was contemplating how to make my escape after the meal. The monk sighed with regret. Chiba, is this silver sufficient to cover the bill? Why does everyone presume I would dine and dash? Chiba felt a headache coming on. Do you require me to toss you out to calculate the expenses accurately? That would suffice. Shusheng nodded earnestly, sitting down to begin counting. Chiba leaned closer to eavesdrop. Stir-fried kidney beans, 7-1. White cut chicken, 28 a total of 1 tael, 9 xian, and 18 wendaha. I have brought a little over 4 taels. That is sufficient. After tallying the expenses, she sat back, raising her chopsticks in anticipation of the meal. Soon, the dishes arrived, and Chiba declared, "Let us eat." The three of them dove in simultaneously, and within a quarter of an hour. The plates lay empty. The monk and Shusheng slumped back in their chairs, bellies protruding, engaging in a playful banter. "You show no love for the young. How can you call yourself a scholar?" the monk chided. "And you indulge in meat. What a shame for a novice monk," Shusheng retorted. "What of it? I have yet to receive my ordination." The monk leaned closer, his head jutting forward. Shusheng, puzzled, remarked, "Indeed, I have seen Master Kurong with 9 marks of ordination on his head, yet you have none. Yours is as smooth as a polished stone. It must feel quite pleasant." The monk touched his head. "My master says not to rush. When I grow up and truly embrace the Buddha, I shall receive my ordination." Shusheng regarded him quietly, realizing that he might not have to become a monk after all. Indeed. The monk nodded with conviction. "Oh," Shusheng scoffed, "so you are merely a freeloader." At this, the monk leapt up in indignation. "You are the one freeloading. My master said not to force anything, but he never said I had to pursue another path when I grow up." He resumed his seat, his eyes vacant, appearing less like a mere 7-year-old child and more like an elder who had seen through the follies of the world. "In truth, being a monk is quite advantageous. At least no one would call you a harbinger of misfortune." Shusheng hesitated before pulling him close, speaking in a tone that was both indifferent and desolate. "As for me, I suppose my only talent lies in reading. I lack skills in farming, am inept at trade, and cannot even raise chickens properly. The one thing I can take pride in is my penmanship." "Has anyone in your family ever starved?" the monk inquired, tilting his round head, his round face, and round eyes resembling a delightful bun. Thus far, no," Shusheng replied. "My parents passed away when I was in my teens, leaving me with a room full of books and some grain." The monk stared at him for a while before suddenly suggesting, "Bookworm, you are so thin. It must be due to a lack of food. Why not come to our temple and become a monk?" Patting the monk's bald head, Shusheng laughed heartily. "Thank you, little master, for the offer. I often went hungry in the past, but life improved considerably once I attained a degree." "Well then," the monk nodded graciously, showing no signs of resentment for being turned down. "When you find yourself starving again, just come to our temple and become a monk." Chapter 18. "How much do you wish for my hunger?" Shusheng nodded stiffly in agreement. Nearby, Chiba, gnawing on a pig's trotter, nearly choked with laughter. Outside, the noise escalated for a moment before abruptly quieting down. Chiba strained to listen. Amid the melodious strains of the eru, a delicate and charming voice sang. In a gauzy robe, the first reveal, the slender waist, lightly swaying, strands of hair drifting, Chiba blinked. "Is she composing poetry?" the monk innocently inquired. "To compose poetry at a tavern. Is this maiden eating while writing? What a unique taste." Shusheng paid no heed, delicately sipping from his teacup, when suddenly 2 lines of lyrics caught his ear. "The withered grass at the jade gate awaits the dew, yet all that is heard is the neighing of horses as they shed their armor." Shusheng sputtered, choking on his tea. Although he could not comprehend the meaning of the song, he found it rather pleasant, Chiba remarked, while the monk solemnly nodded in agreement. Suddenly, Shusheng's face flushed crimson, and in a panic, he leaped up, rushing to cover Chiba's ears. How can you listen to this? You must not hear it." "Must not?" Chiba gazed in astonishment at his frantic approach. "Why not?" the monk lazily inquired from across the table. "It sounds quite nice, though the lyrics." Chiba furrowed her brow in contemplation, while Shusheng, in his flustered state, lunged to cover her ears, inadvertently stepping on air and tumbling onto her. Instinctively, Chiba looked up, their lips meeting in an unexpected moment of silence. The monk quickly shielded his eyes. One must not witness such impropriety. His fingers peeking through the gaps, eyes wide open. Caught in the gaze of one another, Chiba momentarily forgot to push him away, while Shusheng's legs felt weak. His round apricot-shaped eyes gazed steadily at her, akin to a jar of fine wine, intoxicating him to the core. Shusheng could hear nothing, only the faint, sweet fragrance wafting from Chiba and the thunderous rhythm of his own heartbeat. Delicate aureole, fledgling swallow. Rain spirit, cloud soul, dimly sweet. Suddenly, the two lines of lyrics jolted Shusheng back to reality, his pallid face flushed with embarrassment as he fumbled to rise. Chiba remained still, her gaze cast downward, when suddenly, Shusheng's body stiffened, his hand inadvertently brushing against an inappropriate area. Shusheng felt on the verge of tears, raising his head with a quivering voice. I swear it was not intentional. Do you believe me? Chiba remained motionless, merely nodding faintly. I believe you. Shusheng sighed in relief, only for Chiba to add, however, you shall be punished. No sooner had she spoken than Shusheng quickly covered his head, squatting down. Do not strike my head. Very well. Chiba nodded coolly, rising to commence her playful assault. The unfolding drama captivated the young monk, who watched in delight. Chiba clapped her hands. Let us go settle the bill with that. She opened the door and stepped out. The monk approached Shusheng, who was still crouched in a defensive position, poking him. Hey, do you need assistance? No need. I shall rest a moment. Shusheng mumbled, his head buried in his arms. Oh? The monk, lacking compassion, walked away. After a while, Shusheng gingerly rose, stretching his arms and feeling all right. Before departing, he cast a glance at the table, licking his lips. The pig's trotter must have been quite delectable. His heart raced, and he scolded himself for being so foolish. Indeed, I am utterly lacking, Shusheng muttered to himself as he opened the door and descended the stairs, his fingers subconsciously pinching the hem of his garment. Downstairs in the main hall, Shusheng immediately spotted a carefree young master, clad in somewhat ostentatious attire, berating a young lady in mourning garb, who appeared delicate and graceful. Who dares to bring such sorrow here? What kind of place is this? If one wishes to sing, they should do so in a brothel. Truly, my appetite is spoiled. The weeping maiden replied, I am a maiden of good family, not from any brothel. Ha ha ha. The young master laughed heartily, his eyes gleaming with an unspoken understanding. When it comes to women, I have seen and experienced much. Come, let me ascertain whether she hails from a respectable family. The hall erupted with a chorus of laughter, the air thick with hushed whispers and vibrant chatter. The singing girl, overwhelmed with shyness, wished she could bury her head in the ground. Shusheng, failing to spot Qianye and the others, felt a sudden pang of anxiety and hurried down the stairs. As he turned, he caught sight of Qianye frowning and covering her unsteady ears while standing in the shadow of the staircase. Qianye, Shusheng stammered, suddenly beset by an inexplicable sense of guilt in her presence. Noticing that his gaze remained steady, Qianye's mood lightened considerably. Let us go, she urged Otto. The trio made their way to the counter, where Qianye tossed a couple of silver coins and prepared to leave. The shopkeeper quickly interjected, Miss, that isn't enough. Qianye scoffed. Who told you not to keep a proper watch at the door? The shopkeeper gazed at their retreating figures, then glanced back at the girl singing and flirting with others, only to shake his head in resignation, acknowledging his misfortune. It wasn't that he had failed to guard the entrance. Rather, it was the audacity of some individuals who clearly lacked any sense of shame. After walking a considerable distance, Bugu, perplexed, furrowed his brow and inquired, Qianye, why was that girl being bullied? Why did no one come to her aid, instead choosing to merely observe? This? Qianye pondered earnestly for a moment before hesitantly responding. Perhaps it is because she was a willing participant? Then why was she crying? Bugu's eyes, filled with curiosity, betrayed his youthful innocence. Qianye, equally baffled, redirected the question to Shusheng. Scholar, what do you think? I suppose it could be a form of reverse psychology. Shusheng replied, uncertainty lacing his words. Bugu, even more confused, scratched his bald head and queried, if she was willing, then why cry? How does crying equate to reverse psychology? Well, Qianye's eyes sparkled mischievously as she suddenly grinned. It's like this bun. You want to eat it, but I refuse to buy it. What would you do? Recite scriptures? Bugu looked at her expectantly. Anything but that, Qianye retorted playfully. Cling desperately, feigning helplessness, Shusheng interjected quietly. Bugu nodded vigorously, realization dawning upon him. Could this be why she cried? And what, pray tell, is reverse psychology? Qianye adopted a serious expression. It is when you desperately wish to eat a bun but remain silent, merely pouting and attempting to charm me into giving you one. Bugu's gaze followed hers, and he found himself unable to look away, standing there, reluctant to move. Qinya feigned ignorance, staring at the sky. Shu Sheng cast a glance at the two, a gentle smile gracing his lips. Ultimately, the trio hurried back, laden with packages. Oh dear, I am utterly exhausted. The little monk collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath before hastily shoving a bun into his mouth. Qinya couldn't help but ask, didn't you just say you were exhausted? How can you still have the energy to eat? No matter what, I certainly have the strength to eat, Bugu stated matter-of-factly. Shu Sheng leaned on his knees, panting, I think I'm hungry again. What exactly was the purpose of this back and forth? Qinya reclined against the temple's entrance and mused. Perhaps it was merely to satisfy a craving? All right, I must return. Stop eating my buns, little monk. She snatched the package back. Can't you eat your own? Bugu lamented, smacking his lips. But all I have are vegetarian ones. You still wish for meat? Haven't you had enough for today? Qinya chided, tapping his forehead, then turned sharply to Shu Sheng. Scholar, what are you planning to do? Haha, I was merely concerned you might struggle to carry it, so I thought to lend a hand. Shu Sheng chuckled awkwardly. Caught in the act of pilfering. You too, hurry inside. Qinya snapped, shouldering her own bundle and leaving without a backward glance. Let us go. Stop staring, Bugu nudged Shu Sheng. Shu Sheng replied absent-mindedly, then quickly rose, clutching his package as he entered. Huh? Wasn't he supposed to feel embarrassed? Bugu wondered. As the sky darkened and clouds gathered ominously, the rain began to fall. Bugu climbed onto the table to close the window, only to find that no one paid him any mind. Turning around, he spotted the bookish Shu Sheng lost in thought. Hey, bookworm, why are you so distracted? The little monk complained. I'm simply uninterested in what you're saying. So I drifted off, Shu Sheng replied candidly. Bugu, annoyed, jumped down and put his hands on his hips. Don't think I don't know you're daydreaming about Qinya? Shu Sheng feigned disinterest, nodding absently. Bugu grew increasingly irate. Warning, be careful, or a ghost might come scare you to death. Humph. Shu Sheng's face paled slightly. After glancing around nervously, he leaned closer and whispered, Didn't Qinya say there is a graveyard behind here? Indeed. Bugu lifted his chin, dismissing him. And don't you know that my senior brother is a Taoist adept at exorcising spirits? Yes. Shu Sheng's face drained of color as he hastily gathered his belongings. It's dark now. We should get some rest. Bugu studied him for a moment before suddenly bursting into laughter. Bookworm, are you afraid of ghosts? Haha, turns out you're even more timid than I am. As the night deepened and rain pattered against the leaves, Shu Sheng curled up in his blanket, ears perked to catch any sound from outside. The slightest rustle sent him jumping up in fright, ready to flee. As he listened intently, drowsiness overtook him, and he dozed off beneath the covers. Leaning against the wall, someone nearby was fast asleep, their soft snores filling the air. Their rosy lips slightly parted. Feeling parched, Shu Sheng licked his lips, a restless yearning stirring within him, as if a claw were scratching at his heart. Unable to resist, he leaned down, inching closer. Despite the lack of any scent, he found it hard to pull away. Crash! A loud noise jolted Shu Sheng upright. Instinctively scanning his surroundings, he sighed, uncertain whether to lament the loss of a fleeting moment or to feel relieved for avoiding a beating. Clang, clang. No, could it be a ghost? Shu Sheng shivered, the earlier thoughts of desire fleeing in terror. Bugu, Bugu. He hastily nudged the little monk beside him. The monk, annoyed, swatted his hand away and rolled over, going back to sleep. Scholar, scholar. Voices called from outside. Oh no, oh no. Shu Sheng shrank into a ball, terrified. It can talk. This is it. I'm doomed. I'll surely die tonight. Suddenly, the blanket above him was yanked off with force. Chapter 19. Shu Sheng screamed in fright, only for a hand to clamp over his mouth. Struggling beneath the hand, Shu Sheng squirmed until someone exasperatedly declared, Book bag. It's me. He quieted, regaining composure before jumping up indignantly. What on earth are you doing scaring me in the middle of the night? Dressed entirely in black, Qinya briefly averted her gaze, embarrassed by his disheveled appearance. Her expression remained cool. You were the one scaring yourself? Then why did you come over in the dead of night? Shu Sheng retorted, his eyes inadvertently drawn to her lips. What are you staring at? Is there something on my mouth? Qinya, puzzled, touched her lips. No, Nothing at all. Shusheng shook his head, feeling guilty. I thought there might be a ghost. Didn't you say you weren't afraid? Who said I'm not afraid? I'm such a coward. How could I not be scared? Shusheng protested, glaring at her. You nearly frightened me to death. All right, I'm sorry that I need to go out for a bit. Please watch over the abyss for me. Chinya spoke quickly, her tone urgent but her demeanor calm. Where are you going? Shusheng asked hesitantly, glancing outside at the rain. What's your plan with that outfit? He cautiously touched her outer garment, feeling only a slight dampness, which eased his worry. Chinya's expression turned serious. It seems something has happened at Dingen. When I returned this evening, I noticed the abbess had a slight fever. Though it subsided quickly, I fear she might spike a high fever at night, and I cannot just stand by while trouble brews at Dingen. Chinya sighed, irritated by the rain and the series of unfortunate events that had unfolded. I'll have to trouble you to accompany Bugu. Can you walk? Of course I can walk. Shusheng raised his chin defiantly, determined not to admit that he was trembling in fear. Bugu, do you want me to carry you? Chinya poked the little monk, who was wrapped up like a cocoon. The little monk released the blanket and sat up. If you're in a hurry, you can take both of us back. If not, I'd prefer to wait for the rain to stop before heading over. If you want me to carry you back, just say so. Chinya shot him a glare. Bugu grinned widely. Suddenly, Shusheng shouted, You've been awake this whole time. Why didn't you respond to me? I was scared and had to pretend to be asleep. Bugu replied innocently. Shusheng scoffed. Clearly, you were just thinking about the dead scholar and the living monk. Dear benefactor, you must trust that the Buddha will protect you. Before she could finish her sentence, Chinya seized his collar. Can we leave now? The little monk swung his legs off the bed and swayed slightly. Chinya's expression grew impatient, and he nodded eagerly. I've already spoken with Master Korwa. Once dawn breaks, he will go check on the abbess at Dingen. You two will just have to bear with it tonight. A large figure and a smaller one nodded earnestly. The nunnery, with its side rooms, echoed with concern. Master, are you still feeling unwell? Chinya inquired, her worry evident for the elder's health. In just a few days, Master Mingjing had lost considerable weight, resembling a skeletal frame. It's nothing. The fever has subsided. You may leave. Master Mingjing dismissed, her tone indifferent. She patted Chinya's hand, urging, prioritize your own safety, observing her spirited demeanor. Chinya felt reassured and nodded in response. Master, I will die in the kitchen. 3 individuals gathered around a modest dining table. Shusheng scrutinized the somewhat uneasy man before him. His skin appeared sallow and darkened, with thickened knuckles and deep grime embedded beneath his nails. His tattered clothing had been painstakingly mended, while his cloth shoes, revealing his toes, had undergone numerous repairs, accumulating a thick layer of patches. How do you know that person? Shusheng turned to the little monk, who rolled his eyes in response. Dingen. Yes, Dingen. How did you come to know she was in trouble? What is your relationship with her? What proof do you have of your identity or of the truth of your claims? Shusheng pressed, her gaze unwavering and her tone confrontational. The man stammered, rubbing his hands nervously, his face reddening. Hey, Bugu, in distress, covered his eyes and turned away. Shusheng shot him a glare. Do you have an opinion? Bugu retorted with an eye roll. Do you think Chinya would have summoned us if she hadn't clarified everything? What if Chinya didn't ask thoroughly or failed to see through his sinister intentions? I am not a bad person, the man protested, stumbling over his words. Shusheng scoffed. Your face doesn't exactly advertise your goodness. Can you stop being so foolish? Bugu could no longer bear it. With your foolish demeanor, Chinya must certainly find you repulsive. How do you know she finds me repulsive? Shusheng hesitated momentarily, ultimately deciding to disregard the childish remarks, preferring that the little monk recite his scriptures before discussing anything else. Suddenly, a rush of rain accompanied Chinya's entrance. Shusheng, you and the little monk guard the door. If anything happens, ring that bell, and the master will come. She pointed to the copper bell hanging under the kitchen eaves. Shusheng nodded and then pulled Chinya aside, her expression wary as she whispered about the man. Chinya, do you think this fellow is deceiving us? Something about him seems unreliable. Look at his shifty eyes. They indicate guilt. His demeanor is awkward, suggesting he harbors ulterior motives. Are you conducting an investigation? Chinya retorted, playfully delivering a punch that made him wince, tears welling in his eyes. I'm just worried about you. Shusheng exclaimed, cradling his head in feigned despair. Gazing into his watery eyes, Chinya felt a pang of guilt and shifted her gaze, revealing, he is Dingen's brother-in-law. Dingen went to visit his sister but was captured by her family. Who intends to sell her? Her voice grew cold at the last words. Sell her? Shushing gasped, her eyes widening in disbelief. Yes, Chinya confirmed. I must hurry. If I delay, she may indeed be sold. That girl possesses a certain beauty. Wait! Shushing grasped her arm once more, and Chinya turned back, irritation evident in her glare. Yet, Shusheng hurriedly whispered her thoughts. Listening intently, Chinya couldn't help but smile. Hey, Bugu, bored, fiddled with his fingers. Uncle, why don't you rescue her instead of coming here to seek help? The man licked his cracked lips, embarrassed, as he shuffled his feet. His head hung low, as if he could not muster the strength to lift it, his hands nervously rubbing together. My wife just had a baby. I fear their retaliation and dare not intervene. Bugu's eyes widened in surprise. But if Chinya goes to rescue her, won't they realize you tipped us off? Wouldn't they retaliate afterward? I've already told my wife to pack our things. We will leave once I return. Nyodashu expressed his guilt, bowing his head. Unable to save his wife's sister left him feeling restless. However, his father-in-law's family was notoriously ruthless. He had to tread carefully. Avoiding confrontation, yet never expected them to abduct someone during his son's centennial celebration, even threatening to kill anyone who interfered. Nyodashu felt ashamed under the little monk's bright gaze, as if he were being scrutinized uncomfortably. Let us go. Chinya, with only some provisions in tow, pressed her hand against the hidden blade beneath her garment and casually waved goodbye, donning a raincoat as she slowly walked away into the downpour. Nyodashu, burdened with guilt, followed closely behind, anxiously pressing on his twitching eyelid. Miss. After a moment of hesitation, Nyodashu finally spoke. Perhaps you should return. Why? Chinya inquired, perplexed, turning to face him. Nyodashu felt overwhelmed with shame. I cannot allow you, a young girl, to fall into danger. You do not understand. The Pan family wants to sell Wamaizi to marry off to Pan Dague. Before I left, I overheard them asking around the village for suitable young women. He spat in anger. With their kind of character, what girl would be foolish enough to marry into that family? You are a fine young lady. I would hate for you to end up in a situation where, after failing to rescue Wamaizi, you find yourself ensnared as well. He wiped his face, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. His posture remained hunched, as if he had grown accustomed to bowing his head and could no longer straighten his back. The hardships of life etched deep lines into his face, making him appear far older than his years. After enduring such oppression for so long, once he began to speak, he could not stop. How can there be such people in the world? Why does the heavens not take them away? My wife finally gave birth to a son this year, and instead of celebrating, they came to cause this mess at the centennial feast. He lifted his sleeve to wipe his eyes, the rain mingling with his tears, sending shivers down his spine. My wife's health has always been poor. The doctor said she overworked herself as a child. And though she became pregnant several times, none survived. The doctor warned that if this time fails, she will never conceive again. The medical expenses each year amount to a considerable sum. Nyodashu's heart ached. And he fought back tears. Miss, forgive my lamentations. Sometimes I feel that merely existing is exhausting. Chinya quietly acknowledged him, asking, Does Dingen often come to visit you? Indeed, Wamaizi is a good child. Every time she visits, she brings something with her? Nyodashu's face flushed with embarrassment. If not for Wamaizi bringing back so much rice last time, we would have starved by now. Her mother is ill and produces no milk. Speaking of children, a glimmer of life returned to his otherwise sorrowful expression. Chinya fell silent, realizing the true scarcity of their rice supply. As the rain intensified, pouring mercilessly, the two ceased their conversation and hastened their pace through the encroaching darkness. Pan Village Point One household appeared well kept, yet the grass out front had grown wildly, and the yard was littered with chicken droppings. In the main room, a burly youth slammed his hands on the table, exclaiming in frustration, Every day it's just porridge. Can't we have something different? He smashed his bowl down, spilling half of its contents. Dagaway, just bear with it for tonight. Tomorrow, I'll gather some wild vegetables to prepare for you. His mother, dressed in patched coarse cloth, hastily consoled him. Kill that chicken. I want meat. With a defiant glare, Pan Dagaway asserted his demands, while his father, Pan Tai, scolded. What do you want to eat? You should be thinking of finding work instead. That chicken is meant for your wedding feast? Panshur, distressed, picked up the scattered rice grain by grain. You child, if you don't want to eat, then don't. Why waste it? Look at this perfectly good bowl of porridge. Now half of it is gone. Mother, is she truly my sister? Pandagawe, with a shifty gaze, appeared scheming that of course, she came from my womb. How could I not recognize her? Once we find her, I will arrange a suitable match for you. Much prettier than that Chunhua girl, Pandagawe smirked, pondering. Mother, make sure to find me someone beautiful. All right, just as beautiful as your sister. Chapter 20. In the dead of night, even the dogs had succumbed to slumber. Creak! The door swung open, letting in the damp, cold breeze following the rain. Exhausted and famished, Dingen shivered as she hesitantly raised her gaze, only to find a robust figure blocking the entrance. Overcome with fatigue, she suddenly lunged forward. Let me out! On what grounds do you imprison me? Pandagawe seized her roughly, tossing her back. Where do you think you're going? If you try to escape again, I'll break your legs. A sinister grin spread across Pandagawe's face. Father says you're to be my bride. You can't run away. Dingen collapsed to the ground, sobbing. Why haven't you all perished yet? Why do you want to sell me? You abandoned me as a child, and now you wish to sell me. She trembled, her shoulders shaking with each sob. Pandagawe stood, watching her quivering form, her sorrowful beauty captivating him. He thought to himself that a bride must at least possess such beauty. At 17 or 18, he had heard plenty of lewd tales from his friends, often sneaking out at night to eavesdrop on conversations. Just returning from one such escapade, he could hardly contain his excitement at the commotion in the house. Little brother, please let me go, Dingen pleaded, tilting her head upward in desperation. Pandagawe, upon witnessing her pitiful demeanor, was instantly engulfed by rage. He lunged at Dingen, pinning her beneath him, and she let out a terrified scream. He hastily covered her mouth, exclaiming, Silence, you wretched woman. What harm is there in me indulging myself just this once? I am your elder sister, a being far superior to you. A mere beast. Dingen, both anxious and frightened, found herself confined in the small shed at the back of the yard, which was distanced from the front, where no sounds of commotion could be heard. Pandagawe forcefully tore open the collar of Dingan's garments, which she desperately clutched to protect, while Dingen cried out, Help, master, master! Chinya, I know I was wrong, woo-woo. Suddenly, Pandagawe yelped in pain, for Dingen had clawed his face, leaving bloody marks. Enraged and humiliated, he seized her by the hair and struck her several times across the face. His robust and youthful physique allowed him to unleash his strength with brutal force. The blows left Dingen dazed, blood trickling from her lips, her ears ringing, as she lay on the ground. Struggling for breath, bang! The wooden door was kicked open, a gust of cold air rushing in, followed by a swift kick that sent Pandagawe crashing against the wall and then to the floor. Dingen curled up on the ground, trembling, her disheveled hair obscuring her face. Chinya, unable to see her expression, approached hesitantly, asking, Are you all right? No. Dingen hastily wiped her tears, rising to her feet, adjusting her collar with a semblance of calm, and inquired, Is he dead? He should be fine. Chinya turned her head, observing Pandagawe, who, dazed from the fall, groaned and began to rise, his eyes gleaming with malice. Who is this filthy woman, interrupting my pleasure? Chinya approached and struck him across the face. Do you even know who she is? That is your sister. How am I to know? Pandagawe shifted his head, suddenly noticing Chinya, scrutinizing her figure, round and plump, resembling a sweet bun. He swallowed hard, his desire evident. Since she is of no use, I suppose you will suffice. He lunged at her like a starving beast. Thud. Chinya wasted no time, delivering a kick that sent him crashing into the wall with greater force, rendering him unconscious. Ha! Dingen, leaning against the wall, staggered to her feet, laughing heartily. All this trouble for such a wretched creature, ruining our lives. I shall forever remember the days of my childhood, when I had no food. Yet my elder sister would save her rations for me, often fainting from hunger herself. My second sister, with her beauty, was kept locked away, forbidden from working. Tears and snot mingled on her face as she wiped them away with her sleeve. They intended to sell my elder sister, claiming it was to an old bachelor. Unable to bear it, she dashed out and jumped into the river, only to be rescued by my brother-in-law, who they then accused of having seen her naked form, coercing him into marrying her for silver. But upon returning, they deemed the 5 taels of silver insufficient, deciding instead to sell my second sister, who was deemed too beautiful, to a human trafficker for 50 taels. She stood there, her expression devoid of emotion, her gaze fixed on the unconscious Pan Dagwe, filled with unspeakable resentment. "Do you know where she was sold?" "She was sold to a brothel," Dingen howled in anguish, like a wounded beast lamenting its fate. "Years ago, I saw her on the street, ill and driven away from the medical hall, scorned as lowly and debased. But it was not her fault. Why must they blame her? Why, despite her innocence, is she treated like a pariah? Why can they live without remorse, as if nothing has happened? Why doesn't heaven strike them down with lightning?" Tears streaming down her face, she cursed fiercely. "Dagwe, what is all this commotion?" Panshur, yawning as she entered, was taken aback upon seeing Pan Dagwe sprawled on the floor. "Dagwe, why are you on the ground, Dagwe?" She rushed to cradle him in her arms. Crying out in alarm, Chinya approached, wrapping her arms around Ding and gently patting her back in comfort. "Perhaps this is divine retribution, woo-woo." Dingen bit her lip, tears cascading down her cheeks, pooling in her collarbone, the chill seeping into her bones. "All for 5 taels, they drove my elder sister to her death. All for 50 taels, they reduced my second sister to a mere shadow of her former self. Now, who knows how many taels they seek to claim my life?" She glared at the woman, who was still fussing over Pan Dagwe, never sparing her a glance, her eyes brimming with seething hatred. "Yet, it is not entirely accurate. You sold me once, but they rejected me for being too thin and small, discarding me like refuse in the street. You wretched girl, how could you injure Dagwe so severely? Are you itching for a beating?" Panshur screeched in anger. Head of the household, she called out, her voice shrill. Dingen tightened her clothing and glared coldly at her, while Chinya averted her gaze in disgust. Feeling sick at the sight, at the far end of Nyoja village, a dilapidated thatched cottage stood. Though shabby, it was kept clean and tidy. "Hey, do you think we can rescue our sister?" The woman's face appeared gaunt, with fine lines etched at the corners of her eyes, weariness and hardship reflected on her countenance. Yet her gaze softened as she looked down at the child in her arms. Nyodashu crouched silently for a moment before resolutely standing up. "Dachuan, gather your things, I will keep watch over there. If anything happens, I can lend a hand." "I will go too." Pan Dachuan, glancing at her child, recalled her little sister, who had been raised in her care from such a tender age. At that time, she was merely 7, toiling from dawn till dusk. Each day, she would carry her on her back, returning only when night fell, afraid to leave her at home. She had always feared her little sister would not survive. But to her surprise, she had managed to keep her alive against all odds. My sister has endured so much suffering. How can they not let her go? They are truly driving her to her death. Pan Dachuan, recalling the time she encountered her little sister while foraging for wild vegetables, who had coldly stated she had been abandoned, felt tears welling up as the tears fell onto the child's face. He squirmed uncomfortably, prompting her to gently rock him. "Why is it that we sisters have never found a better fate in this life?" Pan Dachuan was gentle, yet after 14 years of compliance, she had not gained a better path for herself and her sister. Instead, that sudden leap had granted her a glimmer of hope. But where, then, lay her sister's path to survival? Pan Tai, feeling restless, scratched his head, his stomach grumbling with hunger, gnawing at him with discomfort. "Bring me some water," he called into the darkness, but after a long wait, silence greeted him. Feeling the coldness of the bedding beside him, he cursed under his breath. Dimly, he heard a commotion outside. At first, he paid it no mind, but as the shouting grew louder, "Head of the household, head of the household," he realized something might be amiss. "What is going on? Mother, are you calling souls in the dead of night? What is happening?" Pan Tai hastily threw on a jacket, rushing toward the backyard, only to find Pan Dagwe sprawled on the ground, Panshur shaking him frantically. "Dagwe, what has happened to you?" Pan Tai paused momentarily, then turned to see Ding An's vengeful glare and Chinya's icy demeanor. In a sudden fit of anger, he stepped forward and slapped her across the face, cursing, "You worthless piece of trash. Are you the one responsible for your brother's state? Qinya, unable to contain herself, retaliated with a kick, sending him flying, and calmly stated, apologies. But this leg seems to have a mind of its own, always wanting to kick people, especially scum like you. Who are you? And why are you in my house? Pan Tai exclaimed as he struggled to rise. Pan Shi, her voice laced with tears, spat venomously. It's surely this jinx who brought this upon us. Perhaps she is the cause of Dague's predicament. She lunged at Dingen, gripping her calf tightly, teeth clenched in fury. Dingen retaliated without hesitation, delivering several kicks to Pan Shi's abdomen. I am the jinx? And what of you? You are also a woman. Why not drown yourself? You dare strike me? Pan Shi was taken aback. Go be honest. I have longed to do this. Dingen kicked out again, while Qinya silently pressed Pan Tai down, signaling him to stay out of it. Look what you've birthed. You ought to be grateful to just have such a creature. How could you betray your own sister? Just recalling the recent peril, Dingen felt an overwhelming urge to cleave him in two. Pan Tai, still processing the situation, glanced between Pan Dague and Ding and Pan Shi, however, reacted swiftly, noticing Ding and's torn clothing and Pan Dague's half-unbuttoned trousers. She shrieked, have you lost your mind? She is your own sister. Pan Dague, stunned by the slap, was consumed with rage. Having been spoiled by Pan Tai and Pan Shi since childhood, he had never faced reprimand. Now, even Pan Shi, who had never dared raise her voice, had struck him, igniting a deep-seated hatred within him. Chapter 21. He covered his face, silent and brooding for a long while. Pan Shi, believing she may have hit him too hard, rushed to console him. Dague, how could you act this way? If word gets out, how will you live with yourself? Bang! Pan Dague retaliated, shoving Pan Shi back against the wall with a heavy thud, causing her to collapse to the ground. Moaning in pain, oh, it hurts so much. You little devil, have you lost your mind? Upon witnessing the Pan family being struck and lying on the ground, Pan Tai was instantly engulfed in fury. He seized a piece of firewood from the ground and brought it down mercilessly, exclaiming, dare you harbor such vile intentions? I shall strike you down, even your mother. Qinya Dingen stood by, observing this farce. You old fool, on what grounds do you strike me? Pan Dague's face fell, his eyes darkened with malice as he rolled up his sleeves, ready to retaliate on the grounds that I am your father. Pan Tai bellowed in rage. Despite his anger, he was indeed pained for his son, delivering blows to the fleshier parts and easing up his strength as the strikes landed. Pan Dague, however, failed to comprehend his father's paternal concern. Instead, his eyes reddened with rage as he grasped the piece of wood, shouting, Old man, how dare you insult me? Who do you think you are? You wretched brat. What did you just say? Pan Tai was taken aback, nearly collapsing from the fury. One was seething with anger, while the other lay groaning on the ground. Pan Dague savored his revenge, a malicious grin spreading across his face as he taunted. Ha! You've been deceived by my mother all these years, playing the fool like a live turtle. Everyone stood in stunned silence, astonishment etched on their faces. What did you say? Pan Tai pointed at him, his hands trembling. Pan Shi cried out, Dague, are you trying to drive me to madness? She crawled over, clinging to Pan Tai's leg, pleading, Father, you mustn't let your thoughts run wild. Silence. Pan Tai kicked out, pointing at Pan Dague, roaring, you better clarify your words. Whose offspring are you? Pan Dague laughed heartily. Fine, I shall tell you. Pan Shi lunged at him, desperately slapping and screaming. What nonsense are you spouting? Are you trying to kill your father and drive me to despair? Get lost. How dare you come here to berate me? Pan Dague forcefully shoved her aside, declaring, I saw it all. You lewd woman, I will end you. Pan Tai's eyes were bloodshot, his face contorted with rage. When I was 5, you two were frolicking behind the haystack, and just a few years ago, when you went to buy salt, you were hiding in the warehouse, sharing a night with him. Pan Dague leered. Had I not seen that and threatened Uncle Panyo, how long would you have kept this secret? He added. He even said, Mother, you are quite promiscuous. Qinya was left utterly speechless, while Dingen stood frozen in shock, her spirit seemingly absent. Pan Tai was fuming, seizing Pan Shi and striking her. I shall teach you for your infidelity. Speak, whose child is he? Enraged, he struck and kicked, leaving Pan Shi's eyes glazed over. Suddenly, she began to laugh maniacally. Indeed, indeed, Dagwai is the child of my secret lover. Bloodied and wild-eyed, she startled Pan Tai, who momentarily froze, allowing her to break free. You always say I can only bear worthless offspring, yet here I am, having given birth to a son who is not yours. You, living turtle, can only produce worthless children. She spat bloodied saliva with venom. Pan Dagwai stood by, reveling in the spectacle. Dingin's eyes were wide. She approached her father, asking, "Father, is this the son you would sell me for? Is this why you forced elder sister to leap into the river? Is this why you sold our second sister to a brothel? You would push us to the brink of death for such a thing." Each accusation rang sharper than the last, piercing through the air. "Who told you to bear worthless children?" Pan Tai retorted defiantly. The piercing scream echoed from outside, as a woman rushed in, frantically grasping Pan Tai, crying, "Where have you sold our second sister?" Behind her, Nyo Dashu cradled a child and carried a bundle, his disbelief palpable. He glared at the Pan couple as if they were monsters. "How could you sell our second sister to a brothel? How could you do such a thing?" Pan Dajong yelled, tears streaming down his face. "Do you have no conscience? That is your daughter, just a worthless child. What does it matter?" Pan Tai retorted stubbornly. Dingin lowered her head, muttering, "Worthless, worthless, worthless." Suddenly, she raised her head, a chilling smile on her lips, and with a swift motion, she seized a knife from behind Chinya, aiming it at Pan Tai. Chinya, taken aback, thought, "Oh, Umitba, she truly has lost her mind, but I saw nothing." She pretended to admire the night sky while kicking Pan Tai down to ease Dingin's attack. "Worthless, worthless, I shall let you taste this bitterness." Dingin lunged at Pan Tai, striking repeatedly until blood splattered the ground. "Ah, ah, ah." Pan Tai writhed in agony, clutching his wounded groin. "You, little sister." Pan Dajong was left in shock at her actions. Dingin, however, remained composed, gripping the knife as she approached Pan Dagwai. "Am I a woman, destined to be bullied by you?" The knife dripped with blood as her eyes remained vacant, her demeanor detached. Pan Dagwai, nearly urinating in fear, stammered, "You, don't come near. I am your brother. I just begged you for mercy." Dingin regarded him without expression. "If Chinya hadn't arrived, would I have been killed by you today? With your good parents merely scolding me, claiming my life was not worth much?" Pan Shi trembled, her limbs shaking as she beheld Dingin, resembling a vengeful spirit. She quaked in fear, desperately pleading, "Fifth sister, your brother is still young. Just a child, spare him. Have you forgotten? I once begged you for my freedom." Dingin screamed in utter despair. Pan Dagwai, in a panic, turned to flee, calling out, "Mother, save me, sister. I was wrong. I admit it." Chinya, annoyed by his noise, kicked a piece of wood at his forehead, successfully knocking him down and silencing him. Dingin, with a fierce expression, pounced upon him, each strike drawing blood. "Ah!" A shrill scream pierced the air. Chinya shook her head, sighing, "You truly have sullied my knife." "Ha ha ha!" Pan Shi rose, laughing and crying simultaneously. "They've all gone mad. They've all gone mad." With a breath of relief, Dingin collapsed to the ground, dazedly clutching Chinya's knife, laughing and crying. "Since childhood, you all found me a nuisance, wishing to drown me. Elder sister and second sister protected me, but now, elder sister has jumped, second sister has been sold, and I have been discarded. And now, my son is no longer my son. Yet you still call us worthless. Ha ha ha. You will never have a son in this lifetime. None, none, ha 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 ha. Is it not amusing? Sister, is it not amusing?" She looked at Pan Dajong, tears streaming down her face. Pan Dajong, heartbroken, rushed forward to embrace her, soothingly saying, "Fifth sister, do not cry, do not cry. Elder sister is here. We need not fear. We need not fear." By the end, her voice trembled with emotion. "Woe unto us, sisters, how cruel is our fate." The two sisters wept in each other's arms, while Nyo Dashu stood helplessly, cradling the child. Chinya rubbed her head, thinking how utterly chaotic it was. The commotion had attracted the attention of the village, and soon, there were knocks at the door. "Pan Tai. Pan Tai, what is happening at your home?" The village chief and the clan elder, accompanied by several young men, knocked at the door. The elder, though elderly, was spry and had never been fond of the Pan family. With the noise escalating, he felt inclined to teach them a lesson. What a disgrace! Is this how a father behaves? Surely he has lost all sense of decency. The elder scolded indignantly, and what father would demean his own daughter so? Be careful, lest there be retribution. Wu elder, village chief. Pan Dajong wept as she opened the door. Dajong, what brings you here? Unlike the elder's frail demeanor, the village chief was in his prime. He was astonished to see Pan Dajong, who had not set foot in her family home since being sold to Nyodashu. Village chief, my family is in turmoil. Pan Dajong wiped her tears, causing the elder's heart to skip a beat. What has happened? Is it the fifth girl? Has she? Surely, they were not forcing her to the brink of suicide, were they? The elder panicked. Quickly, summon a doctor. I have already sent Daju to fetch one. Pan Dajong stifled her tears. Her voice still raspy. Village chief, elder, please come in and let us speak. This matter cannot be resolved in a few words. You must see for yourselves. The village chief, suspicious, inquired, what exactly has transpired to leave me so anxious? As they entered, they were greeted by a scene that rendered them speechless. I in the back courtyard. Upon nearing, the village chief and elder gasped in horror. They trembled, raising their voices in alarm. What has happened? In the woodshed, Pan Sure clutched a kitchen knife, murmuring, it's all over. It's all over. Pan Tai lay in a pool of blood, half his body stained crimson, while Pan Dagwai, hands clutched to his groin, had fainted from the pain. The only one appearing relatively normal was Dingen, who sat by the door with the child, her gaze vacant and expression hollow. The village chief fixated on Pan Dajong, demanding, Pan Dajong, explain this chaos. How did it come to this? Wu. Pan Dajong sank to the ground, weeping uncontrollably. The more he pressed, the more she cried. Dajong, crying won't resolve anything. Quickly clarify what has transpired, the elder urged. Yet, Pan Dajong could only shake her head amidst her tears. You should inquire of me. With an expressionless countenance, Dingen turned to face them. Why, sister? She cannot voice it. Cannot voice it. The clan elder felt a jolt in his heart, instinctively glancing at the village chief, who looked back briefly. Fortunately, it was the dead of night, and there were not many people outside. The few young men who had arrived together were asked to wait in front. What on earth is happening? The village chief felt utterly overwhelmed. Seeing so much blood, the clan elder began to feel faint, swaying slightly as he leaned against the wall, gasping for air. He sighed deeply at Dingen. What a handsome lad. But alas, he lacks good parents. Child, take your time and speak. Do not rush. Chapter 22. Dingen gazed into the void, revealing a smile more grotesque than tears. My father discovered my mother's infidelity and realized that my younger brother was not his child, which drove him to madness, declaring he would divorce her, and then, they fought. Upon hearing this, the clan elder was immediately dizzy with rage, his lips trembling in disbelief. Infidelity? The village chief, noticing his precarious state, hurried to support him, incredulously asking, Infidelity? How is this possible? I do not know. Dingen shook her head, laughing grimly at the absurdity of life. She chuckled a couple of times, her voice hoarse, then bent down to comfort the child, humming an incoherent tune as she did so. She is? The village chief scrutinized her closely, sensing something amiss in her demeanor. Pan Dachuan, having cried enough, wiped his tears and stood up. Village chief, my sister has been a bit shaken. She is somewhat disoriented at the moment. Oh, the village chief thought to himself, is she not simply mad? He quickly stated, keep an eye on her. Village chief, my sister is just momentarily overwhelmed. Years ago, my father abandoned fifth sister for the sake of Degue. What? The clan elder was nearly driven to the brink of apoplexy, his voice quivering. Did he not say she was abducted? That was merely a ruse to deceive you. What he said cannot be trusted. The village chief found his words credible. After all, he knew who Pan Tai was years ago, when I heard fifth sister had been abducted. I sensed something was amiss, so I inquired and discovered that my father claimed we were too poor to raise her, thus giving her away. Pan Dachuan lowered his head, his eyes filled with profound hatred, while the village chief and clan elder were too absorbed in their lamentations to notice, reflecting on Pan Tai's retribution. It was not a matter of giving her away. She was simply cast onto the streets by my father. Then, where is this fifth girl? After searching for 2 days, I finally found her in the fields and later sent her to a nunnery for fostering. Pandachuan turned to glance at Dingen, biting her lip. I was worried about my younger sister, intending to persuade my father, but upon arriving, I overheard them arguing. It is said that De Gui let slip that my mother had given birth to him through an affair, which infuriated my father, who shouted that he would kill her and even ran to the kitchen to grab a knife to slay that lecher. My mother refused to reveal who the man was. Pandachuan, usually gentle, now exhibited a decisive and resolute demeanor. My father confronted De Gui, threatening to kill him, and when my mother pulled him back, it ended up like this, with an expressionless gesture towards the unconscious Pan De Gui. She continued. My mother, upon seeing this, went mad, seized the knife, and ended up injuring my father as well. This perfectly elucidated the injuries of Pan De Gui and Pan Tai, while the implausibilities, such as how the strikes were so precise. How a beaten woman could calmly wrest a knife from a man, and how she, who had previously only cried out of fear, could now be so composed, were unanimously overlooked by them, in essence. The village chief and clan elder were not particularly concerned about the details. They harbored no fondness for the Pan family. They merely sought a plausible explanation and a narrative that seemed reasonable. After a moment of contemplation, the clan elder asked, "Who is that man?" "I do not know." Pandachuan shook her head. The clan elder and village chief shifted their gaze to Dingen. Dingen tilted her head, pondering for a considerable time, then blankly stated, "De Gui said he is Uncle Panyo, the salt seller." The clan elder exchanged glances with the village chief, who nodded in agreement. He stepped forward and called out loudly, "Shanzi, go fetch Panyo. If he refuses to come, bring him by force." A young man promptly replied. A quarter of an hour later, Panyo was dragged over by the young man called Shanzi. Village chief, clan elder, why did you summon me at such an hour? Panyo, over 40, sported a small mustache and had a lean frame, exuding shrewdness in his speech and demeanor. You have quite the audacity. The clan elder snorted coldly. Turn around and take a look. Take a look? Ha, clan elder, what is there to see? Panyo chuckled nervously, but upon seeing the clan elder's grim expression and the village chief's equally troubled countenance, he felt a pang of fear, slowly turning as if confronted by a ravenous beast. This, he stammered, collapsing to the ground in terror, his legs trembling uncontrollably. The village chief approached him from behind and thundered, "Pan De Gui is your son with Pan Sure." Panyo was instantly terrified, stammering, "Village chief, he fumbled for words, suddenly noticing the seemingly deranged Pan Sure, pointing at her and cursing. "It's all her fault. She seduced me. I did not want this." "You did not want this," the clan elder, enraged, slapped him across the face. "How old are you? You are not without a wife. One hand cannot clap alone." The village chief interjected, standing beside the clan elder. "What shall we do? Such matters cannot be allowed to spread. If they do, will the young men and maidens in the village still be able to live in peace? It is not my fault. She said my wife bore 2 sons. So she must also bear a son." Panyo protested, unable to resist the temptation of the meat dangled before him. "You still dare to argue?" The village chief, unable to contain his rage, kicked him. Such disgraceful conduct in the village would leave him unable to hold his head high in the future. Son! Pan Sure, who had been sitting on the ground in a daze, suddenly sprang up and rushed towards Panyo, clinging to him while frantically tugging at his clothes, muttering, bear a son, bear a son." "Ha, ha, ha," Dingen coldly laughed, gently rocking the child in her arms, humming, bear one, throw one away, bear one and throw one away. Who told you to be a worthless child? Ha ha ha." The clan elder was infuriated to the point of spitting blood, trembling as he pointed at Pan Sure, berating Panyo. "Do you still have any shame left? Hurry and pull her away." Panyo, flustered and drenched in sweat, exclaimed, "This woman has gone mad. Let go, he shouted. The village chief, his head aching, "Dachuan, why are you just standing there? Pull your mother away." "It is useless. I am a worthless child. What good does it do to pull her away?" Pandachuan quietly stated beside Dingen, her tone revealing a hint of resentment. The village chief was so enraged that he wanted to wash his hands of the matter. But he knew that if he did not intervene, tomorrow would bring untold chaos. Meanwhile, Pan Yo was in a state of panic. The clan elder's glare could nearly devour him whole. Finally, in desperation, he delivered a few slaps to awaken her. Smack, smack, Xinghua, have you gone mad? Pan Yo's hands went numb from the blows. Pan Shi, holding her swollen face, stared blankly at him before suddenly bursting into tears. Pan Yo, our son is doomed to extinction. Pan Yo felt an overwhelming urge to strangle her, gritting his teeth in resentment. If you do not want to die, shut your mouth. At that moment, Nyo Dashu returned, carrying an elderly doctor with a long beard, who was panting heavily. Dachuan, I am back. Pan Dachuan stepped forward to assist the doctor, and Ding'an abruptly asked, Why are you so late? It is difficult to find a doctor skilled in medicine who is willing to make night visits. Nyo Dashu replied sheepishly. Upon hearing the word doctor, Pan Shi seemed to remember, pointing at Ding'an while crying and cursing. This harbinger of death has severed Degua's life force. The clan elder was taken aback and then furiously retorted. You made a mistake yet dare to blame others. Silence her and confine her to the ancestral hall. Clan elder, it truly is her. Pan Shi protested repeatedly, but the more she tried to explain, the more the clan elder despised her. Pan Yo had already distanced himself from her, as if she bore a plague. The village chief regarded Ding'an with a hint of suspicion. Pan Dachuan gazed at her quietly, his voice sorrowful, moving all who heard. Mother, have you not harmed us sisters enough? Please spare my younger sister. You abandoned us when we were young, and now that we have grown, you wish to sell us again. Is this how it is? Mother, are we truly your flesh and blood? Ding'an laughed, a laugh that sent chills down the spine. Whether a worthless child is truly flesh and blood matters little, for we are all destined to be sold or cast aside. Enough, enough, silence, the clan elder bellowed, glancing at the village chief and nodding. The village chief stepped outside to find several robust women, who muffled Pan Shi's mouth and escorted her to the ancestral hall, while also sending Pan Yo to kneel there, awaiting punishment according to clan rules. The elderly doctor, his beard all white, trembled as he examined the injuries of Pan Tai and Pan Degue. Shaking his head, they are beyond saving, alas. He cast a glance at the bloodied kitchen knife on the ground, realizing that such wounds would render them incapable of even becoming eunuchs. Nevertheless, he proceeded to treat their injuries, then wrote a prescription advising the ointment should be applied 3 times a day, and care must be taken not to let it fester. As for the medicine, it should be taken twice daily. Pan Dachuan took the prescription and awkwardly fished out a small silver coin from his pocket, stammering, Doctor, I apologize for the inconvenience. The meager amount, not even half a tael, prompted the doctor to shake his head gravely. Who could resist my compassionate heart? If you lack the means to procure medicine, simply gather some herbal roots and crush them for application. The elderly doctor meticulously instructed her on which herbs to dig up before slowly waving his hand, saying, that big oaf, please escort me back. As dawn gradually broke, Nyo Dashu carried the old doctor on his back, step by step, until they reached the edge of the small town, where he was suddenly halted. All right? You may return, and I am familiar with the remaining path. Very well, take care. The old doctor ambled along with his medicine box, passing through the marketplace when someone unexpectedly patted him on the back, offering a bowl of wontons. Startled, the old doctor looked up to find a plump young woman, whose smile radiated warmth like a sunflower. Doctor, have a bowl of wontons. The old doctor eyed her sideways, his gaze sharp. Miss, speak plainly. Hee. Chinya turned around, patting the knife at her waist. The old doctor instantly understood. Ah, so that's why the blade seems a tad thinner and smaller. What's the matter? Miss, do you harbor some grudge? Is it necessary to chop so fiercely, turning it almost into dumpling filling? The old doctor shook his head disapprovingly. T wasn't me who wielded the knife. After a moment of hesitation, Chinya recounted the events of the night that a family, forsaking their daughter for their son, now sought to reclaim her, intending to sell her off as a bride for their son. However, the son, a scoundrel, was caught attempting misdeeds and, upon reprimand, it was revealed that he was born of infidelity. The old doctor widened his eyes in disbelief. Miss, Are you reciting a tale? In the 23rd chapter, the daughter confronted her father, asking if he regretted drowning her 3 sisters at birth, forcing her eldest sister to leap into the river, selling the second sister to a brothel, and casting her aside. The father callously replied that she was a worthless commodity, indifferent to her fate, for he only desired a son. Infuriated, the daughter went mad. Chinya spread her hands, declaring her innocence. I am even more blameless than that tofu. The old doctor, upon hearing her words, felt a heavy heart, losing his appetite for wontons as he rose to go home, muttering, "What a fright you've given this old man." Regrettably, he thought he shouldn't have been so meticulous in wrapping them. He ought to have been more casual about it. From behind, Chinya heard his self-talk. "Remember to pay up. I do not feast for free," he called out. Chinya sighed, understood. The afternoon sun was somewhat intoxicating as she leaned against the kitchen door, squinting at the dazzling light, drowsiness slowly overtaking her. "What are you staring at? Even a corpse wouldn't be able to sleep with your gaze." Dingen shot her a glare. "What, do you think I've lost my mind too?" Chinya shook her head. "No, I'm just curious to know what it feels like to avenge a great grievance." Dingen fell silent for a moment before responding, "Thank you." "For what?" She did not ask. Perhaps it was gratitude for her saving her, or perhaps for silently helping her seek vengeance, or even for being willing to come for her. "For so many years, I have always feared them," Dingen said, a trace of anxiety etched on her face. "Ever since I learned my second sister was sold to a brothel by them. I worry that one day they will abduct me and sell me off to who knows where. I've been hiding so cautiously for so long, yet I ultimately couldn't escape. The stone has fallen, and I am now resolved to contemplate an escape, yet I never anticipated such a dramatic turn of events. Tell me, what is the purpose of life?" Dingen pondered this question, unable to find clarity. Perhaps it is simply to live. Chinya also did not understand the essence of existence. Just like Dingen's parents, the poorer they were, the more they wanted to have children. The less they could afford, the more they insisted on having them, prioritizing sons, until they could no longer bear any more. Chinya rested her hands behind her head, leaning back as she gazed at the sun, golden and blinding, as if all that had transpired last night were but a dream. Suddenly, a crash and a roar erupted from the backyard, and Chinya caught snippets of various profanities strung together in a cacophony of curses. As if one wished to berate their ancestors from head to toe, Dingen remained unfazed. "I fear his reckless movements might hinder his recovery, so I've tied him up, as long as you're happy." Chinya chuckled awkwardly. "I'll take my leave now. I'll return tomorrow. Tonight they will be well cared for," she said gently and dutifully, though her expression was harsh and cold. After a moment's hesitation, Chinya added, "I wish you joy." She was not Dingen and could not fathom her despair and resentment. Thus silence seemed the most appropriate response. On her way back, Chinya stopped by a pastry shop, purchasing a bundle of treats, humming a cheerful tune as she headed home. At the nun's temple, Shu Shang was sweeping the floor absent-mindedly, mechanically repeating the motion. Bugu sat nearby, shoving peanuts into his mouth while critiquing him. "Bookworm, Ive discovered a serious issue." What is it?" Shu Shang turned around, bewildered. "Are you harboring ill intentions towards Chinya?" Bugu derided his feigned ignorance. Shu Shang, irritated, swatted him. "Can't you act more like a monk? Even matchmakers are not as gossipy as you." Bugu covered his bald head, glaring at him. "Anger only reveals guilt. Did you attend morning classes today? Too busy eating. Be cautious lest you find yourself unable to walk the path in the future." I'm still a child. If I don't eat more, how will I grow taller? Besides, isn't it better than someone who weighs but 2 taels? Bugu grinned, mockingly snorting through his nostrils. Shu Shang, incensed, hurled the broom down, seizing the peanuts. "You heartless little rascal. I peeled these peanuts. Stop eating them. Save them for my ulterior motives." Bugu hurried to reclaim them, but Shu Shang, leveraging his height, held them aloft, observing him jump about. "Little monk, did the Buddha not teach you about karma? Who was it that laughed at me so heartily just moments ago?" Bugu retorted, "You bully the weak. You exploit the small." Shu Shang observed him, amused as he panted heavily. "What are you two doing? Are you dissatisfied with the cleanliness of the temple and seeking tasks to occupy yourselves?" Chinya observed the swirling leaves and dust in the courtyard. Bemused by their self-satisfied playfulness, the two froze, turning to see Qinya standing at the door, coldly watching them. Hee hee hee. They both chuckled awkwardly, hastily separating. One picked up a broom, pretending to sweep, while the other picked up a wooden fish, earnestly tapping it, muttering something incomprehensible. Enough. Stop pretending. Qinya was at a loss for words as she handed them a few bags of snacks, waving her hand. All right, you may leave. Is this how you treat them? Throwing them away after use? Shu Shang protested. Isn't this the so-called burning bridges after crossing rivers? Bugu nodded in agreement while tapping the wooden fish. Humph, do you want me to treat you to a meal? Qinya glared at them, knowing their petty schemes. Ha ha ha, the two laughed foolishly. After casting them a glance, Qinya walked towards Mingjing Shirtai's room, only to be suddenly pulled back by Shu Shang. Qinya turned around. What is it? Shu Shang hesitated before speaking. Shirtai met Master Qiuroyang this morning and has been in a deep slumber ever since. Qinya's expression shifted instantly, disregarding any further words as she dashed towards Mingjing Shirtai's room. Bugu tugged at his sleeve, while Shu Shang looked down. What's wrong? I wasn't aware that Shirtai had met the master. Sleeping like a pig. Who would know? Bugu grumbled. Discontented, Bugu huffed while Shu Shang shook his head. Pulling his hand to leave in the side room, Mingjing Shirtai was lost in a nightmare, reliving her passionate youth filled with righteous indignation for love. Yun Wangshu, I know it is you. The girl in the pink dress stubbornly glared at him, her defiant eyes brimming with unshed tears. They all say you are dead, but I refuse to believe it. I know you could never die so easily. The boy, resembling a beggar, turned his face away, refusing to look at her as he hurriedly departed. Day by day, she evaded everyone to draw near him, from initial resistance to later calm, and finally to closeness. She thought that if she persisted, one day they could be together openly, until that marriage proposal arrived. Yun Wangshu, you know I will never marry? Mingjing Shirtai was drenched in sweat, her body burning with fever, continuously uttering nonsensical words. Why can't you marry me? I have lost everything. No family, no kin, not even a name. I have accepted it, she sobbed, like a wounded beast hiding in a corner, licking her wounds in solitude. Shirtai, Shirtai. Qinya tirelessly wiped her body with warm water. And upon seeing Mingjing Shirtai's fever not subsiding, her heart raced with fear, reminiscent of the helplessness she felt listening to thunder outside her home as a child at midday. The sun blazed fiercely. Mingjing Shirtai had finally calmed down, sleeping soundly. Qinya sighed with relief, reaching to touch her forehead, finding the fever had completely abated. Stretching, Qinya rubbed her rumbling stomach, planning to prepare something to eat. She casually took 2 pieces of glutinous rice cake towards the kitchen, only to be astonished. What are you doing here? I am concerned that should anything happen to you, there would be no one to assist. Shu Shang cradled her bowl and said, Here, freshly made red bean porridge. You must eat. It feels as though you are digging a pit, waiting for me to leap in. Chiba gazed at him earnestly and remarked. Nonetheless, a faint smile lingered on her face. Shu Shang lowered her head, biting her lip to suppress her laughter, watching her eat with such earnestness. Suddenly, Chiba recalled something, rising to rummage through a bag of roasted chicken. I almost forgot. Looking at the porridge, she murmured. It seems a pity to pair it with porridge. Here, take this. Chiba divided the chicken into 4 pieces, keeping 2 with wings for herself and pushing the rest towards Shu Shang. If we indulge in chicken without inviting him, he will surely be upset. Shu Shang said while wrapping a chicken leg. Chiba, how old are you this year? Shu Shang hesitated, biting into the chicken leg as she inquired. 18. That means you can marry. Chiba blinked. What's the matter? Ahem, nothing at all. Shu Shang awkwardly turned her head away. Chiba, suspicious, felt an inkling that you might be up to no good. Ahem. Shu Shang erupted into a thunderous cough, tears streaming down her face. What is with your strange behavior today? Chiba approached to pat her back as she leaned in. The sweetness characteristic of a young woman brushed against his heart, igniting a fierce yearning. Perhaps it's because of the wind this morning. Shu Shang leaned her head against her shoulder, feebly gazing at her. I think I might have a slight headache. May I borrow your shoulder for a moment? Chiba felt his forehead. I don't sense any fever. Or perhaps you've eaten something that has poisoned you? She bent down, nearly pressing her face against Shu Shang's. Both froze simultaneously. Shu Shang swallowed hard and, driven by an inexplicable impulse, nudged his nose against Chiba's. Chiba stiffened, her face flushing red with embarrassment, and angrily tugged at his ear, exclaiming, "Where do you think you are rubbing?" Shu Shang grinned and pleaded, "Fair lady, please show mercy." "Mercy? Of course, I shall show mercy." She twisted his ear in circles, causing Shu Shang to tear up, gazing at her with pitiful eyes begging, "Might this noble lady spare my life?" Chiba suddenly felt her hand burning, hurriedly retracting it, turning away. "All right, you should quickly return to your studies." Oh. Shu Shang rose sluggishly, glancing back reluctantly a couple of times, but Chiba did not look back after a long while. Chiba, in a fit of anger, kicked the table and exclaimed, "This scholar grows increasingly unbearable. Why does he not hasten to his studies, pursue his academic achievements, and seek a match, instead of running here for what? What exactly is bothering me?" She couldn't quite understand. Chapter 24. Chiba kept vigil over Master Mingjing throughout the night, just as she did when she was ill in her childhood. In a daze, a bony hand gently traced her brows and eyes. Without opening her eyes, Chiba rolled into her embrace, murmuring, "Master?" Master Mingjing gazed at her lovingly, delicately outlining her features, stating, "It has been a long time since I last combed your hair." Chiba sat up and looked up at her. Then, "Master, please comb it for me once more." "All right." In front of the dressing mirror, Master Mingjing sat gracefully, while Chiba rested her head on her lap. Obedient and quiet, I wonder what my Chiba will be like when she gets married. Holding a wooden comb, she ran it through the dark tresses, her tone wistful, her eyes bright and vigorous, filled with life. "I have no intention of marrying. I am quite content as I am." Chiba closed her eyes, the face of that infuriating scholar surfacing in her mind. "Hee hee." Master Mingjing chuckled softly. "I once said the same. It seems every girl must utter such words a few times in her youth." Chiba pouted. "Master, when you recover, let me take you out for a stroll." Master Mingjing paused, her hand halting. "Indeed? I should venture out for a while. I will take you back to see my home," Chiba envisioned. "You change into a different outfit, and others will surely think you are my mother. We shall disguise ourselves as mother and daughter wandering the world." She spoke with great enthusiasm, gazing at her expectantly. "Master, what do you think?" Master Mingjing remained silent, slowly helping her twist her hair up and secure it with a ribbon. "Chiba, I buried something beneath the great tree in front of Master Kuro's temple. Consider it your dowry when you marry in the future." "Are you implying that I am bothersome?" Chiba pouted, "always urging me to marry." She sighed deeply, filled with grievances. Master Mingjing caressed her face, gazing intently until suddenly tears welled in her eyes. "Chiba, thank you for entering my life. Thank you for accompanying me all these years. Thank you for being there in my most helpless and despairing moments. For pulling me back from the abyss, and for making me realize that my life is not solely about waiting and resentment. Master." Chiba stared at her in a daze, feeling an unfamiliarity in the presence of such a master, yet secretly sensing a familiarity, as though she was always meant to be this way. "I remember the first time I saw you. You were bundled up tightly, drenched in sweat from the heat, and crying inconsolably from hunger." A smile danced at the corner of Master Mingjing's lips. 18 years ago, at Shuangyan Mountain, in the temples atop the two peaks, the incense was sparse, yet it seemed no one cared. One day, as autumn leaves fluttered down, a little monk from Shiyuan Temple heard the sound of wailing and opened the mountain gate to find a green bundle on the ground. Upon closer inspection, it turned out to be an infant. Unfamiliar with such a small child, he cautiously poked at her, confirming that she only cried and would not bite, before carrying her back. Master Kuro, while coaxing the baby, sighed. "Master, why are you sighing?" the little monk asked, perplexed. Master Kuro replied, "I am sighing for myself. It seems today will be fraught with trouble." "Ah?" The little monk was even more confused. "It's a girl, and I have no idea which fool left her at the monk's temple." Master Kuro scoffed. "What on earth is the child's purpose?" After feeding the child rice soup, he carried the swaddled baby across the way. The little monk hesitated but felt that guarding the door was more suitable. What if, later on, Master gets beaten? Should I intervene or pretend not to see? Master Mingjing shot a cold glare at him, her gaze shifting from his face to the infant in his arms. "You have quite the audacity." "Master, I have something to say." Master Kuro bowed respectfully. Master Mingjing retorted angrily. If you have something to say, return to your monk's temple and speak slowly. Do not stand on my territory and prattle. You misunderstand, Master. Master Kuro attempted to explain but was met with a punch. Misunderstand? What nonsense! You bald donkey, what are you trying to deceive me with? As a monk, you should maintain purity and avoid worldly affairs. Where did this infant come from? You bald donkey, it's bad enough you lie, but to bring an infant before me, flaunting it is utterly despicable. The poor abbot had yet to clarify a few words before being beaten to a pulp. After enduring a beating, he finally managed to explain himself, and Master Mingjing gazed at the tiny girl, reaching out to touch her. The infant's tiny hand grasped her finger tightly, her pure, large eyes looking up at her. Giggling, Master Mingjing's eyes brimmed with tears as she bent down to embrace her, gently rocking her in her arms, her voice catching. Shall we name you Chiba? The tiny infant seemed to respond with a joyful coo. No, Chiba is too cold. Let us call her Chiba. May you be as free as a leaf, flowing with the wind and your heart's desires. The little hand waved joyously, watching them fade into the distance. Master Kuro's eyes reflected a mixture of longing, oppression, and pain. Closing his eyes, he clutched his prayer beads and murmured, Chiba, precious, precious. Chiba, that is well, very well. In the blink of an eye, you have grown so much. Master Mingjing gazed at her, suddenly overcome with tears. Chiba, startled, fumbled, Master, please do not cry. By the end, her voice had taken on a sobbing tone. Have I done something wrong? Master Mingjing shook her head. I just suddenly felt like crying. She looked at her with reluctance. I wish to eat noodles, then I shall make some. Master, will you rest a while longer? I wish to take a walk, then do not wander too far. Breakfast will be ready soon. I in the kitchen. Chiba was cracking eggs when Dingen entered, plopping down behind the stove, wearily asking, Is there any for me? Chiba frowned. You certainly know how to pick your moments. I am afraid there isn't. Dingen replied listlessly, leaning against the wall, lost in thought. After scooping a bowl of flour to make dumpling soup, Chiba glanced over and asked, Why do you look like you're on the verge of death? Indeed, I am about to collapse from exhaustion and hunger. Dingen rubbed his eyes, distressed. We have been arguing from morning till night, and amidst the quarrels, we ended up crying and laughing. These past few days, when others passed by her home, their strange glances must have made them think her family is a bunch of lunatics. I am so annoyed. My elder sister is pressuring me to marry. With a face full of impatience. All right, here you go. Eat quickly. Chiba pushed the thick soup towards her. And now you need not hide anymore. I thought you wouldn't return. After a brief silence, she remarked, Only here is it somewhat peaceful. In the side room, Chiba saw no one. Glancing around, the abbess was not present, causing her heart to skip a beat. Her right eyelid twitched uncontrollably, and she hurriedly ran outside as she opened the door. She spotted the frail and pale Mingjing abbess approaching from afar. She rushed over and supported her, exclaiming, Abbess! Mingjing abbess lifted her eyelids to glance at her before softly collapsing. Abbess! Chiba had never realized her voice could be so piercing. In the side room, Shusheng stood behind, feeling guilty as he said, Chiba, I'm sorry, I saw Abbess Mingjing go to meet Master Kurong and intended to stop her. But what good does saying sorry do? It's none of your concern. Chiba's eyes brimmed with tears. The one who should apologize isn't you. It is you who ought to say sorry to Abbess Mingjing. She shook her head, speaking each word with anger and panic. Chiba! Mingjing abbess weakly opened her eyes and reached out her hand. Chiba quickly grasped it, gazing at her with tear-filled eyes. Abbess, we promised I would take you home. You must get better. Such a foolish child. Mingjing abbess's eyes held an unusual calmness. I no longer have a home. Bring me that box. Mingjing abbess looked towards the opposite side. Dingen approached, retrieved it, and handed it to her. You've returned? It is good that you are safe. Mingjing abbess comforted Dingen, who looked upon her with a heart filled with trepidation and sorrow. Yes. Mingjing abbess opened the box and took out a small silver ball. Its color darkened, slightly smaller than an egg. She held it in her hand, lost in thought, and suddenly thrust it into Chiba's grasp, saying, Keep this as a memento. Wow. Chiba burst into tears, shaking her head frantically. I don't want it, no. I don't want you to leave me. Woo-woo. Dingin's eyes suddenly reddened. She turned her head away, blinking, unwilling to let tears fall. Your household registration is here too, Dingin. Take this. May you have a smooth life. She handed over a small silver coin weighing 3 taels, and Dingin hurriedly accepted it, her heart a tumult of emotions. Chiba clutched Mingjing Abbas's hand, choking back sobs. Abbas, I will take you to Xiangwang Temple. Saying this, she attempted to rise. Mingjing Abbas pressed her hand down, shaking her head weakly. What is there to see? May we owe nothing to each other in this life, and may we not meet again in the next. She wearily leaned back, slowly closing her eyes, her breathing growing tranquil. All those feelings of grievances, love, and hatred seemed to vanish in an instant. Chiba stared at her in disbelief, unable to accept that she had truly left her behind. Abbas, wake up, don't scare me. I won't make you angry anymore. Abbas, I promise to take you home. Don't sleep now, we'll leave at once, she cried out, tears falling down like raindrops, splattering on Mingjing Abbas's serene face. Creating little splashes. Abbas, you said I was so good, you wouldn't leave me. She wept over Mingjing Abbas's lifeless form. You promised you wouldn't abandon me. Her heart-wrenching cries echoed within the room. Lingering in the air, Dingin stood by, helplessly watching her grieve, unable to comprehend the despair and sorrow Chiba felt, and could only remain silent. Chapter 25. Shusheng approached, hesitated for a moment, then placed a hand on her shoulder. Chiba, the abbess has already departed. Do not let her leave with worries. Chiba slowly lifted her head, tears cascading down her cheeks, leaving marks on Shusheng's heart. She looked at Mingjing Abbas and suddenly sprang up. Rushing outside, Shusheng gasped, Chiba, but she had already vanished from sight. He hurried to pursue her, only to notice the piece of paper beneath the abbess's hand. He picked it up, unfolded it, and fell silent. Iti Xiangwang Temple. Master Kurong, who had been chanting, suddenly felt a pang in his heart, his expression stunned, and the string of prayer beads in his hand suddenly broke, scattering beads across the ground. Thud, thud. He stared at the beads that kept bouncing, motionless for a long while, then closed his eyes, tilted his head back, and let 2 streams of tears fall. Omitba! Suddenly, an uproar erupted outside. Kurong, Yun Wangshu, come out, come face me. Chiba yelled hoarsely from outside. Why? Why? She questioned loudly, tears continually falling from her chin. Dio, you know she was killed by you. Why did you treat her this way? What wrong did she ever do to you? Chiba cried and scolded outside. The sunshine was so bright, yet she felt cold to the bone. From now on, she had no home woo-woo. She wailed outside. Dingin stood beside her, unsure how to comfort her. He could only seek help from Master Kurong's door. Gently pushing it open and then quietly closing it, he saw his master crying, Chiba, Chiba, calm down. Shusheng gasped for breath, rushing over as if he had lost half his life. What good is calmness? Can it bring the abbess back? Chiba glared at him stubbornly, her eyes and nose red, tears still falling. Shusheng hesitated, then decisively embraced her. Perhaps living was too painful. Death could grant her peace. Wow! Chiba cried loudly. Shusheng held her, allowing her to lean on his shoulder and cry her heart out. Without any romantic thoughts at this moment, he only felt heartache as the sky darkened. The morning hall was already prepared. Mingjing Abbas lay quietly in her coffin, her brow no longer furrowed, her lips no longer bitter. Her expression serene. Chiba squatted in front, numbly burning paper money. You go on, she suddenly said. Dingin was taken aback and turned to look at her. Chiba's gaze was fixed not on her, but on the flickering flames. Then she apathetically handed over a piece of paper money. Dingin opened his mouth but found no words. You go on, she repeated. Wait, Dingin murmured softly. The night grew quiet once more. Suddenly, a distant light flickered. Chiba squinted, staring for a while, only to realize it was a lantern. Aren't you afraid? Chiba looked expressionlessly at him, adding, Don't wander outside at midnight. It's easy to attract ghosts. Shusheng looked at her with a sense of grievance. Can't you not scare me? Ah! Chiba sighed in resignation. When did I ever say that to frighten you? Shusheng jumped back in surprise, suddenly remembering the dark night behind him, hurriedly ducking behind Chiba, peering out, muttering, You're really not deceiving me? I feel like you're tricking me. Chiba, speechless, replied, Just consider it my soliloquy. Shusheng grew even more aggrieved. And you still say you're not scaring me. Chiba lost her temper, angrily delivering a punch. I said I'm not scaring you. And you don't believe me? I said you treat me like I'm talking nonsense, and you keep whining. Are your bones itching? Shusheng covered his head, squatting on the ground in silence. Chiba was startled. Fearing she might have hurt him, book bag, she tentatively reached out to push him. The stunned figure suddenly fell towards her, and Chiba hurriedly caught him. Alarmed, Are you all right? Who am I? He suddenly sat up straight. Looking bewildered, why am I here? And who are you? His watery eyes widened in surprise, resembling a frightened rabbit. Chiba paused for a moment, then abruptly got up to leave, returning a while later, lifting a brick, and said to him ominously, I've heard that fighting poison with poison is the most effective. Ah, spare me, oh heroine. Shusheng leaped up, clutching her leg and wailing. Chiba let out a cold laugh, watching Shusheng scurry away in fright. Observing him bounce about for a while, Chiba leaned back against the coffin, falling into silence. Shusheng, dejected, sat beside her, then took out a stack of scriptures from his pocket, burning them while mumbling, Abbess, may you bless me with a bit of fortune. What for? Are you going to propose? Chiba replied with a muffled voice. Shusheng tilted his head, glancing at her, then chuckled lightly, his tone rising. Yes, humph. Chiba scoffed. Abbess, give me all his wealth. Must you be so harsh? Shusheng muttered, At least leave me some. I don't want to eat porridge every day. He hung his head, appearing utterly disheartened. Looking at him, Chiba chuckled, her heavy heart suddenly feeling considerably lighter. Here, keep this safe. Shusheng handed her a piece of paper. What? Receiving it, Chiba unfolded it and saw, Ming Chiba. Tears instantly welled up, and she hurriedly turned her head, covering her face with her hand. I wouldn't laugh at you. Shusheng watched as tears fell from beneath her palm, slowly forming a small puddle. Who knows? She said, looking up defiantly, her voice nasally. Lowering his head with a smile, he casually remarked, Chiba, Ming Chiba, sounds quite lovely. So the abbess's surname is Ming. Such a rare name. No, the abbess's original surname was Yu. Chiba looked down at the household registration paper. Mingjing is her monastic name. Mingjing is not a platform. Where has the dust settled? Her voice grew somber. And Shusheng suddenly understood that indescribable love. The abbess said she lost herself, hence Yu Xining no longer exists in this world, which is why she allowed me to take her surname of Ming. Shusheng nodded, looking at her with a conflicted expression. With a glance, Qinya feebly remarked, If you have something to say, just say I no need to make it sound like constipation. Shusheng's expression turned as ghastly as if she had swallowed a fly. Speechless, he retorted, Could you not behave like a proper young lady? Must you speak of flatulence and constipation so freely? Each time she posed a question, he nodded in agreement. Shusheng looked at her with anticipation, wondering if she had decided to change her ways. First, turn right upon exiting. It's a straightforward path, and I want to see you off. Disappointed, Shusheng pressed on. What about the second? Second, you block your ears. Shusheng despaired. Is there a third? Third, you must defeat me. With a thud, Shusheng collapsed, frothing at the mouth. 7 days later, Master Mingjing was to be buried. Qinya stood before the wooden frame, torch in hand, lost in thought. Qinya, don't delay. Dingen approached her side, gazing at Master Mingjing. Qinya hesitated, always yearning for Master Mingjing to suddenly rise and say, Qinya, let me take you home. Unfazed by death, Shusheng leaned in, anxiously saying, Qinya, if we let this go, it will start to smell. Qinya glared at him. Don't think that just because we're in public, I want to dare to hit you. Shusheng wore a look of feigned concern. Do you wish to remember Master as something foul? Who knows, in a few days, there might be maggots. Unable to contain her anger, Qinya hurled the torch behind her and charged at him. Shusheng hastily fled, glancing around until he spotted a large tree. He swiftly climbed up, calling down to the grim-faced Qinya below, You, don't come any closer. If you do, Qinya, hands on hips, scoffed, And what will you do? I'll jump, he declared. Rest assured, I am a person of principles. Qinya maintained a serious demeanor. Shusheng blinked in confusion. Huh? The observing young monk, Bugu, unhelpfully interjected. What she means is, whether by death or burial, you can jump without worry. Tears streamed down Shusheng's face, You are being so cruel. Once you become a ghost, you can come back for revenge. I'll be waiting for you, Qianye grinned. After silently crying for a moment, Shusheng gritted his teeth, closed his eyes, and jumped. Qianye was taken aback. You really jumped? Quite bold. With a light touch of his toes, she soared up, grasped his waistband, and pulled him back down. Then she regarded him with a cold smirk. Shusheng, ever the observer, immediately crouched and shouted, "Old rule. No hitting the face." Humph, as a person of principles, I certainly won't. Qianye chuckled darkly, but I won't agree to that. Saying this, she seized his collar, aimed, and delivered a punch to Bugu. Gazing at the sky, sighed. This clearly demonstrates that speaking out of turn can be fatal. Shusheng, now bruised and battered, howled like a ghost. Dingen stood nearby, watching the fierce flames. Qianye, sometimes I truly despise you. Will you leave? Her curiosity piqued. Qianye tilted her head, pondering. I will, but not just yet. Indeed, with your abilities, you will thrive wherever you go. Dingen remarked. Qianye suddenly smirked. Are you envious of me? No, I am jealous of you. Dingen tightened the bundle on her back. Qianye rolled her eyes dramatically. Dingen, I've realized you're still as annoying as ever. Dingen retorted, likewise, you're not exactly endearing. I'm not trying to please you. Qianye shot back, staring directly at her. Dingen, unwilling to yield, glared back. Good to know. Strange, I have no peculiar habits, nor do I seek anything from you. Why should you like me? Qianye shook her head, clicking her tongue. My dear, do not overestimate yourself. It would be quite embarrassing. Dingen glared in frustration, turning away with her burden. The mountain wind blew fiercely, swaying Dingen's figure. Hey, where are you going? After watching her for a while, Qianye suddenly shouted. Without turning back, Dingen called out, to find a wealthy man to marry. Oh, Qianye exclaimed, I wish you every success. Finally, a pleasant word reached her ears. Dingen turned back, waving her hand. It's rare for someone not to mind that you eat like a pig. Take care to eat less, lest you scare that bookworm away. Humph, worrying about others while munching on radishes. She muttered, then called out, just don't find someone too rich. The excessively wealthy won't look your way. Dingen trembled with anger, her steps quickening as she muttered, a dog's mouth can't spit out ivory. Meanwhile, Qianye stood atop the mountain, grumbling. She's definitely cursing me. Humph, we're equally matched. Come on, let us hurt each other. Chapter 26. Master Kurong pushed the manuscript before him, smiling. The timing is just right. Shusheng took it, hesitating a moment before tossing it into the fire to be consumed. Was he afraid of ranking too low? Master Kurong casually organized the scattered scriptures beside him. That is not it. Shusheng shook his head, wanting to speak but faltering. Master, may I ask? He suddenly inquired. Is it better to repay evil with evil, or to return kindness for malice? Should one laugh away grievances or repay blood with blood? Master Kurong paused, raising his gaze to seriously regard the plainly dressed youth before him. What do you think it should be? I don't know, Shusheng replied, lost, staring into the void, his voice ethereal. To live well is their dying wish. Yet, avenging them and clearing my father's name is something I've always upheld. Are the enemies strong? Like an ant attempting to shake a tree, ridiculously overestimating themselves. Master Kurong sighed deeply. This question, I too have yet to resolve. In my time, in pursuit of revenge, I dragged many innocents into the fray. Do you regret it? No, I do not regret avenging myself. He gazed deeply at Shusheng, his eyes profound like the sea. I only regret why I could not remain more calm and rational. All these years, I have never regretted slaying my enemies, exterminating their entire clan. Yet I lament the innocent lives I have harmed. Master Kurong shook his head, lamenting, the sins I bear cannot be expunged by reciting scriptures. Then do you still? Shusheng looked at him, torn. Master Kurong smiled. Do you believe there is a Buddha in this world? Shusheng, conflicted, hesitated several times before responding. Ah, there should be, right? When I chant, the Buddha resides in my heart. Master Kurong declared. When I set down the wooden fish, the Buddha dwells in that grand hall. When I discard my robe and forget my vows, then the Buddha is far above in the heavens. Shusheng was taken aback. Master, you're not a competent monk. Don't you understand? Master Kurong looked at him as if he were a fool. In truth, being a monk is not much different from before. People simply wish to believe in what benefits them, or they seek a narrative to soothe their souls. After a long silence, Shusheng spoke heavily. Avoidance. Indeed, avoidance. Master Korong sighed, his brow furrowing deeply, the lines etched upon his face deepening. In just over a month, he had aged considerably. I in my day, unable to bear this heavy sin, unwilling to let her linger, I entered that temple and recited those scriptures. After so many years, I have grown accustomed to it. He lowered his head, reciting the scriptures slowly. Master, do you wish for me not to seek revenge? Shusheng hesitated. Master Korong shook his head. I neither discourage you from seeking vengeance nor encourage you to do so. Your life is yours to decide. I only hope you think clearly and do not end up like me, burdened with debts and restless for years. He rose, extending his arms, his voluminous robe billowing as the wind blew through, creating a rustling sound like the wailing of spirits near death. Master Korong asked, Do you see it? Shusheng stared at him in confusion, shaking his head. Behind me, there are countless evil spirits, unbeknownst to him. Shusheng saw black skulls emerging behind Master Korong, their grotesque expressions clawing and biting at him. Shusheng shuddered, frozen in place. Pouring a cup of clear tea, he handed it over. Master Korong's gaze softened. His smile warm. Are you well? I'm fine, he stammered, feigning calm despite his trembling voice. Life is like this. Either you forgive yourself or you forgive others, Master Korong said meaningfully. Shusheng's fingers trembled around the cup. After a long while, he hoarsely managed, I understand. As long as you comprehend, that is sufficient. Master Korong stood and walked inside. The white robe gradually appeared to Shusheng as if it were stained black, as if countless evil spirits swirled around it. Howling. Shusheng felt a chill, rubbing his arms, sensing the room was freezing. On the 5th day of the 5th month, Master Mingjing would be no more. That very day, in the evening, as the orange-red sunset enveloped the mountains, Master Korong descended the mountain with the young monk Bugu. Qinya would forever remember that day. Although it was evening, the sunlight still pierced painfully, prompting tears she could not hold back, since you cannot bear to part. Why not see them off? Sitting beside her on the mountaintop, Shusheng gazed at the distant silhouettes of an old man and a young boy, asking, They will leave eventually. What difference does it make if I see them off? She gazed intently at the receding figure in the distance, her heart racing with an overwhelming sense of anxiety, as if the very air had been snatched from her lungs. If one were to liken her life to a tapestry, then Master Mingjing would undoubtedly represent the maternal thread, while Master Korong would embody the paternal. Ever since that fateful day when Master Mingjing departed, she had not laid eyes on Master Korong again. It seemed that to meet him would be tantamount to betraying Master Mingjing. Shusheng continued to fixate on the path ahead, hesitating momentarily before exclaiming, The Master, he has grown old. Qinya was taken aback. Grasping the unspoken implications of his words, the Master had aged. Inevitably, he would pass away, and it was likely that after this parting, seeing him again would prove to be an arduous task, years hence. When the Master was no longer present, would you regret not having seen him today? Shusheng inquired further. Silence. Qinya retorted sharply, her eyes betraying a flicker of emotion. Shusheng shook his head, turning her to face him, gazing deeply into her eyes as he said, Qinya, do you understand what Master Korong signifies to Master Mingjing? Qinya stared blankly into his eyes, nodding in response. Shusheng pressed on, Then, do you comprehend the significance of Master Mingjing to Master Korong? Qinya hesitated, slowly shaking her head. You see, everyone empathizes with the weak, for they voice their sorrows, but what of the so-called strong? Are they not deserving of pity? No, it is simply that you remain unaware of their inner turmoil. Thus, you instinctively perceive them as formidable, when in reality, they are fragile, easily toppled with a mere touch. That day, after you departed, the Master wept. Qinya gasped, looking up at him, her eyes reflecting her hesitance and regret like a clear stream. Though you did not inquire, I still wish to share this with you. When Master Mingjing arrived that day, I witnessed her demeanor. She appeared spirited, but I sensed it was a fleeting glimpse of vitality. Qinya bit her lip, silently observing him. On that day, Master Mingjing had not adorned herself in familial attire, but rather wore a simple blue garment, her hair neatly arranged, her figure slender, as if the wind could whisk her away. She approached the guest room without hesitation, promptly pushing the door open. The individual seated cross-legged within was taken aback, looking up with a moment of bewilderment. "You?" Master Korong opened his mouth, at a loss for words, letting out a heavy sigh before softly reciting a sutra. Bodhisattva, due to the perfection of wisdom, the heart is free from attachments. Free from attachments, after many years apart, can one find peace within? Master Mingjing calmly approached, kneeling before him. The more sutras one recited, the harder it became to remain untroubled. Master Korong's gaze remained level, yet it would often inadvertently linger upon Master Mingjing. "Is that so?" She murmured to herself before raising her gaze to him. "After all these years, do you have anything to say to me?" Master Korong appeared lost in thought, his lips moving as if to speak. Yet his demeanor quickly returned to calm, his eyes filled with compassion. "Old monk has nothing." This single phrase seemed to encapsulate a multitude of sentiments, yet it also felt void of substance. "So it is." She sighed in resignation, rising to depart. Behind her, Master Korong's gaze remained fixed upon her, filled with restraint and forbearance. Standing at the threshold, with her back to him, Master Mingjing remained still for a long moment before finally asking, "In the next life, will you marry me?" A profound silence enveloped them, and as Master Mingjing tilted her head, a solitary tear fell. She refrained from speaking further, as if that question had fulfilled a long-held desire. Exhausting her very being, she opened the door and stepped outside. Shusheng, standing motionless at the entrance, watched her retreating silhouette, suddenly hearing what seemed to be a soft utterance from within the room. "All right," though it could have merely been the whisper of the wind passing through the house. Echoing faintly, "Qinya, I do not wish for you to harbor regrets," Shusheng declared earnestly, his gaze fervent. "One longs to care for their parents, yet time waits for no one. I trust you understand." Qinya turned away, remaining silent, and as Shusheng observed her reluctance to move, he felt a wave of discouragement wash over him. He noticed the distant figure halt abruptly at the bend ahead. "Is the master watching Qinya?" He pondered, feeling both perplexed and enlightened. Yes, and yet, not quite. Master Korong squinted at the distance, reflecting upon the years gone by. The winds of Shuangyan Mountain, still as capricious and affectionate as ever, it seemed unlikely they would meet again. In the backlight, a figure drew closer. "Master!" Someone murmured from behind. "Qinya, you've arrived!" Nugua exclaimed excitedly, bounding forward, a hint of petulance in her voice. "I thought you wouldn't come to see us off. How could I not? I merely lacked the courage to face it. Master has departed, and soon you all shall too. From this moment forth, Shuangyan Mountain will be left with but a solitary soul, Master." She looked up at the smiling Master Korong, her expression timid. Master Korong beckoned, "Qinya, come here." As Qinya approached, she noticed how much older Master Korong appeared, yet his eyes remained as sharp and luminous as ever. Overcome with emotion, she suddenly said, "I am sorry." "You have done no wrong," Master Korong replied, shaking his head. He then removed the prayer beads from his wrist, stating, "These were a keepsake for my mother." The red beads had dulled, their golden inscriptions faded with time. This is too precious," Qinya murmured. "Silly child." Master Korong affectionately ruffled her hair. "Beneath the great tree in front of my house lies your dowry. Do not forget." Qinya blinked in astonishment. "Oh, then let us part ways." He turned and walked away. Nugua pouted, embracing her reluctantly. "In the future, when I grow up, you must recognize me." "I will surely recognize you. The monk who adores red bean buns must be you." "Not necessarily." Nugua felt a flicker of joy, yet her lips still turned downward in reluctance. "Take this." Qinya handed her a bag of silver coins and a bundle of red bean buns. "Take good care of the master." "Indeed." She stood still for a long while, until the two figures faded from her sight, before she squatted down, hugging her knees, her voice a mere whisper filled with sorrow. A solitary soul. Chapter 27. Qinya led the mule through the woods, the sound of its hooves echoing softly. Occasionally, she spotted prey hidden among the bushes, picking up a stone from her bag to hurl at them. The wild chicken flapped its wings before collapsing. "Ah," she sighed, her enthusiasm waning. Too weary even to collect her catched. It seems you are my only companion now. She patted the mule. The mule disdainfully tossed its head. You stubborn creature, have you grown too spoiled with recent feasts? Chinya scolded. You wasted an entire pot of noodles today. The mule remained still, its big eyes wide and innocent as it gazed at her. Suddenly deflated, Chinya lamented. Why do I even bother talking to you? You cannot speak human language. She untied its reins and gave its backside a gentle pat. Let us go. I might as well enjoy my freedom alone, eating whatever I desire and visiting taverns at will. The mule stood motionless as she chased after a deer, delivering a punch to knock it unconscious, before grabbing the wild chicken on her way out. Unknowingly, Chinya found herself heading toward Langtu village. Muttering to herself, I wonder if that book bag has perished from hunger. The May sun had already begun to warm the air, and she sought refuge in the shade, eventually squatting beneath a large tree. Lost in thought. Oh no. I seem to recall that the book bag resides in Langtu village, but I never inquired about its exact location. Am I to search one by one? Chinya considered turning back. Yet a sense of stubbornness held her firm. In the distance, she heard a commotion accompanied by a familiar scream. As she crouched and rubbed her ears, she realized it was a voice she recognized. Ah, help, help. This dog has gone mad. Someone come quickly. Help, Shusheng shouted, flailing his arms and straining his voice. Unfortunately, most villagers were out in the fields weeding, and those few at home were oblivious to the ruckus. Chinya shook her head in disbelief. Look at him. He barely resembles a scholar. I am far more fitting. Shusheng sprinted desperately, glancing back to see a drooling wild dog hot on his heels, intent on sinking its teeth into him. Help! His cries were filled with despair. As Chinya watched the wild dog leap forward, its sharp teeth bared, she turned away, unable to bear the sight. With 2 fingers pinching the soft flesh at the back of the dog's neck, it whimpered and released its grip. She casually tossed it aside. Is your esteemed rear end all right? She asked, steadying the grimacing figure before her. Shusheng pointed at her, his hand trembling with indignation. You truly possess the most vicious of hearts. By the end of his outburst, his voice cracked with emotion. Did I not save you, or did I err in my timing? Chinya retorted, her patience waning, loosening her grip as if to throw him to the ground. Do not think I did not notice. You were merely waiting for me to be bitten before coming to my aid. He wiped his tears with his sleeve. Well, Chinya felt guilty, her gaze shifting as she avoided his eyes. I just hesitated for a moment, that is all. Do you think I would believe that? Shusheng hobbled away, limping with each step. Hey, where do you think you're going? Chinya called after him, regretting her actions. Let me fend for myself. Shusheng did not look back, continuing to move forward. All right, I admit my fault. What must I do to appease you? Chinya raised her hands in surrender. Now that sounds more like it, he muttered, adding, I need to see a doctor. I can hardly walk. Chinya cast him a sidelong glance and approached him, resignedly squatting down before him. If you want me to carry you, just say so. This made it seem as though she was pleading with him, rather than him acknowledging his own mistakes. Shusheng, without a shred of courtesy, leaned in close. Are you trying to strangle me? Chinya's eyes turned white, and he foamed at the mouth. Oh, my mistake, my mistake. As Chinya carried him toward the county town, Shusheng remained silent, so quiet that she could hear his breathing beside her, the rhythm surprisingly synchronized with her heartbeat. Suddenly, she felt the heat of his breath, so intense it sent a shiver down her spine. Licking her lips, she feigned nonchalance and asked, What did you do to provoke that dog? I was tired of studying, so I went for a walk. When I reached the back mountain, I saw it gnawing on a wild chicken. I thought, it's so plump, it must taste delicious. Chinya replied, speechless. Wild dogs are fiercely protective of their food. You should be thankful it didn't bite you, Well, haha. Shusheng chuckled awkwardly. What I meant was that wild dog was quite fat. With all that meat, it must be very tasty. Suddenly, recalling something, he licked his lips, his stomach growling. Haven't you eaten? She asked, furrowing her brows. I've been starving since last night. He lamented, feigning pity as he lay against her back. Chinya felt a twinge of sympathy and said, So pitiful, then let me treat you to something to eat. I still owe you 3 meals, right? Really? He perked up and his backside felt less sore. What do you want to eat? Since I'm in a good mood, feel free to choose. Why demands aren't high, he grinned. excitement radiating from his flushed face. Let us catch that dog. Why? To take revenge, Qianya frowned. You want to eat dog meat? It must be delicious, he said, his mouth watering. How do you know it's delicious? Have you eaten it before? Qianya felt an inexplicable mix of emotions, somewhat gloomy and a bit displeased. Xu Shang, oblivious to her mood, cheerfully recounted, when I was a child, I saw a half-dead dog caught in a trap. At that time, my parents had already passed away, and I was so hungry I wanted to dig up some wild vegetables. That's when I found the dog, barely clinging to life. And then? Qianya felt an unsettling premonition. The hunter came to check and said it wouldn't survive. He took it back to kill and eat, and even invited me along. Wow, that dog was quite plump. So much meat. He gulped at the memory. What did that dog look like? Qianya asked casually to Yum. Xu Shang pondered carefully. It had yellow fur and was quite sturdy. Oh, and it had a little white spot on its nose. Calm down, calm down. Qianya took a deep breath. Was there also a little white fur on the tip of its tail? By the end, she was gritting her teeth, her face twisting with rage. How do you know? Xu Shang remained blissfully unaware. How would I know? Chinya's eyes blazed with fury as she yanked his arm down, shouting, How would I know? Because that was my dog. Her thunderous voice stunned Xu Shang into silence. Calm down, heroine. Xu Shang tried to pry her hand away, but her grip was as unyielding as a rock that I wondered why that dog had disappeared. It turns out you all ate it. You owe me my dog. When she was about 8 or 9 years old, Qianya had found a little puppy, fluffy and yellow, with the most delightful little tufts of white on its nose and tail. She had fed it, and it loved to follow her around. Thus, every time she ate, she would save some for it, often going hungry herself at tea that time. The young Dingen teased her, saying she ate more than a pig and that if she kept a dog, it would eventually eat her out of house and home. Furious, Qianya nearly fought with her, only to be dragged away by Master Mingjing a year later. That little puppy had grown plump, waddling toward her with its chubby backside swaying. You bastard! How dare you eat my little white-furred friend? The mere thought ignited Chinya's fury. Little white fur? Xu Shang asked, dazed. That was my dog. One day, it went out to play and never came back. I squatted by the temple gate until dawn, and in the end, Master Mingjing had to carry me back helplessly. I waited for so long. Long enough that I thought, as long as it comes back, I'll give it bones to eat every day and never force it to bathe again. But in the end, it never came back. Dingen mocked her, saying she had given her dog away to someone else. Furious, she waited at the door with a kitchen knife, ready to sharpen it if the dog dared return. I was merely an accomplice. My crime shouldn't be punishable by death. Xu Shang pressed down on her hand earnestly. Then why didn't you save it? You just watched it get eaten and even shared a bowl of meat. Qianya was on the verge of exploding. Xu Shang glared back. Can you please not be so unreasonable? How was I supposed to know that was your dog? Besides, back then, I could barely feed myself. How could I have saved it? She wiped away her tears of bitterness. Did I know you back then? I don't care. Qianya was obstinate. You're being unreasonable, Xu Shang retorted angrily. Qianya rolled up her sleeves, laughing coldly. When have I ever been reasonable? Grabbing his collar, she swung a fist down. Don't hit my face. Xu Shang cried out in despair. Qianya paid no heed, mercilessly striking him until his head was swollen, leaving him breathless on the ground, finally feeling a sense of relief as she clapped her hands. All right, get up, let us go. After the exertion, she declared she was hungry. Xu Shang looked up at her pitifully. I'm in pain all over. I can't walk. Stop pretending. I know my own strength. No, I think I might have a fever, and it seems like I'm bleeding from my backside. Qianya was startled, squatting down to lift his long shirt, revealing that blood had already stained his clothing. You fool, why didn't you say anything? She frantically searched for a pill to give him. Xu Shang struggled to swallow it, coughing. It's so dry. I thought you'd be fine after venting your frustrations, you bookworm. Your head must be smashed by books. What's more important, your grievances or your health? She hoisted him onto her back and hurried toward the county town. Along the way, Xu Shang lay against her back, his consciousness foggy, barely able to hear her mumbling. If I die, probably no one will give me a proper burial. If I truly die, Qianya, you must burn more paper money for me. I really don't want to eat porridge anymore. Shut up. Die? You're tough. You won't die so easily. Qinya replied hoarsely. Guarantee you saving money to propose. If you die now, how pointless would that be? Propose. Who knows if they'd even want me? But you're a scholar. Yes, a scholar with barely any meat on my bones, he lamented, filled with grievances. If you're all right, I'll take you to eat something. Anything? Shu Sheng managed a pale smile. Yes, what about dog meat? Do you want me to throw you out? Hee hee, he chuckled softly, his slightly hoarse voice making Chinya's ears flush with warmth. England Hall was the clinic run by the old doctor who treated Dingen and his little brother. Behind the cloth curtain, the old doctor shook his head while preparing medicine. Tiske, that dog bit deep. Look at these bite marks. They're quite orderly, when he caught sight of the bruises on Shu Sheng's face. He shook his head. This young couple should be mindful of their quarrels. How can they strike each other on the face? No, it's not. Outside, Chinya's face flushed crimson as she desperately defended herself. The old doctor craned his neck to glance. Oh my, your face is so red, and you still say it's not. Shu Sheng, however, smiled nonchalantly. It looks frightening, but she knows how to control her strength. It doesn't hurt. Chinya was fierce in words, but her heart was tender. Well, one is willing to fight, and the other is willing to take the blows. The old doctor sked. Just don't let me old man's teeth rot. No, Chinya stood outside, fuming. Though I'm old, my eyesight is still sharp. I know you two are not a couple, the old doctor said leisurely. I'm just advising you to get along. Shu Sheng pondered seriously. Chinya wanted nothing more than to rip the curtain aside and give him a good beating, but remembering that someone was currently bare-bottomed, she quelled that thought. Turning to confront the old doctor, she snapped, Is it a habit of old age to meddle in others' business? The old doctor, however, was in good spirits, merely chuckling. Young lady, you hit the nail on the head. When I was young, I didn't like to meddle. It is only now that I can't sit still. Fine. He is already self-reflecting, she thought. And since she held a favorable impression of the old doctor, she could only sulk outside, feeling an inexplicable sense of loss. In the 28th chapter, after the old doctor finished writing the prescription, he called over an apprentice to fetch the medicine and then emerged, winking mysteriously at Chinya. Chinya looked at him suspiciously, eventually walking over. Old man, what is going on? Do you know how that family is doing? The old doctor spoke with excitement about the gossip. Chinya's expression turned strange, her confusion evident. Why are you so excited? Didn't I tell you? I'm bored out of my mind. Oh. She nodded, then leaned in eagerly. What happened with my family? Not long ago, there was a commotion about a suicide. The old doctor smacked his lips. Seemingly at a loss as to whom he should feel pity for, it is said that the father intended to strangle what he believed was his son's child. Had it not been for Chinya's knowledge of the situation, one could easily have become dizzy from the chaos. Is he dead? She inquired. Unfortunately, the younger one was unharmed, while the elder was beaten to near death. The woman who had eloped was said to have succumbed to her feelings and returned to her maternal home. But before long, she was sold by her brother and sister-in-law, reportedly to a remote mountain hollow, where she would never escape in this lifetime. Old man, do you know the details quite well? It was as if he had witnessed the scene firsthand. Hee indeed, my old self has no other hobbies. I simply delight in this. The old doctor seemed somewhat proud. Chinya was at a loss for words, genuinely unsure what there was to be proud of. She supported Shu Sheng as they slowly exited the medical hall, and behind them, the old doctor cheerfully advised, before the wounds scab, do not let them touch water. Take the medicine on time, and apply the ointment as scheduled. By the way, he may have a fever tonight, so keep an eye out. How troublesome. She felt an urge to abandon this person and flee, yet Shu Sheng clung tightly to her arm. Sighing, she turned her steps toward the tavern. Where are you going? Shu Sheng pulled her back and asked. Treat myself to a nice meal. No way, Shu Sheng protested. Chinya shot him a glance and walked straight ahead. Shu Sheng, using all his strength, dragged her back. After several attempts, Chinya lost her temper, pulling him into a corner alley and demanding, What on earth do you want? Shu Sheng looked up at the sky. I'm tired. I want to go back and rest. Then just go back, Chinya scoffed, perplexed by his intentions. What about you? I'll eat first, then we'll talk. I object, Shu Sheng protested outright. Why? Shu Sheng insisted stubbornly, leaving Chinya exasperated. Because I have dietary restrictions and cannot eat? So, you won't let me eat either? Chinya raised an eyebrow in retort. Exactly, he felt justified. On what grounds? Chinya asked, gritting her teeth. Who told you to stand by and watch while I was in distress? Only to beat me afterward. So, you are holding this against me? She glared at him, inching closer until their breaths mingled. Shusheng blinked and leaned in a bit more, their lips almost touching. You? Chinya felt flustered. As Shusheng's eyes, often described as alluring, seemed to lose some charm, yet his focused gaze revealed a blush on his face. He reached out to touch her large eyes, causing Chinya to involuntarily close her eyes. Suddenly, a cool sensation brushed against her lips, accompanied by a soft murmur. I've wanted to do this for so long. Saying this, he kissed her again, leaving with an expression of unfulfilled desire, smacking his lips. Feeling it was somewhat salty yet sweet, with a loud thud, Chinya's face turned crimson, resembling a cooked shrimp, rooted to the spot, paralyzed with shock. After a long pause, she regained her senses and, feigning anger, shouted, "Beauty tricks won't work on me." Nothing could deter her from her pursuit of culinary delights. She hurriedly turned to leave, only to be pulled back, pushed against the wall, and kissed again. This is too much. Chinya's heart raced, her eyes wide as she observed the fervent kiss he placed upon her. What to do? To hit or not to hit? Just as she hesitated, she suddenly remembered that this fellow had a fiancé. If she held back, it would be a disservice to herself. She delivered a punch to his stomach, followed by a kick that sent him sprawling. Ouch! Shusheng clutched his belly, kneeling on the ground in pain. Although he had anticipated this, it still hurt terribly. Chinya stood still, looking down, biting her lip, lost in thought. After a moment, she approached, squatting down to ask earnestly, "Scholar, how much silver do you still need for your marriage proposal?" What? Shusheng was taken aback, looking at her with confusion. She reached out, pulling him up despite his grimace. Chinya asked, devoid of emotion, how much silver do you still need for your betrothal? Shusheng was momentarily stunned, staring at her in disbelief, moving his lips to say something, but ultimately dejectedly shook off her hand and limped away. Chinya stood there, not chasing after him, quietly gazing at the unsightly sign of the tavern across the street. Such ugly characters, such inedible dishes, even the waiter wore a face of misfortune. Turning away, she stormed off in frustration. The tavern's waiters stood there baffled, wondering what had gone wrong. Outside, the wind relentlessly battered against the windows, producing a clatter. She irritably rolled over, finding herself alone in the quietness of her abode. So annoying. Sitting up, she tugged at her hair in frustration, then flopped back down, burying her head under the covers, eye in the darkness. That fellow's face grew increasingly vivid, along with the warmth of his lips. Why, with a fiancé already? Would he come to flirt with me? Chinya lamented, sprawled on the bed, feeling as though she might cry from the discomfort. Had she known, she would never have saved him. Grumbling a few curses, she suddenly thought, I wonder if he has a fever. Once that thought struck her, sleep eluded her, tossing and turning until she nearly dismantled the bed, ultimately rising with a conflicted expression. His injury seemed to bear the slightest relation to me. His severe wounds were hardly connected to my beating him. After muttering to herself for quite a while, she took off. Looking from a distance at Langtu village, it appeared shrouded in darkness. Chinya crouched atop a tree, wrestling with her thoughts for a long time before finally deciding to head to the spot where she had encountered Shusheng that morning. The Shu residence. Shusheng lay on the bed, eyes closed and drowsily drifting in a daze. He dreamt once more of Chinya's lips, soft pink and plump. He swallowed hard, sighing in irritation, his stomach growling, yet as he gazed at the buns on the table, his thoughts drifted elsewhere, and he smiled foolishly. Chinya climbed through the window, and upon landing, was greeted by Shusheng's lascivious grin. Without hesitation, she delivered a punch. What were you dreaming about? You? Shusheng jumped, hastily wiping his mouth, fearful of being branded as a lecherous fool in her eyes. You? What are you doing here? Didn't you say you'd have a fever tonight? So, I came to keep watch, thus saving anyone from claiming I owe them. Chinya's tone was icy. Shusheng felt a surge of joy, but, wary of inciting her wrath, maintained a serious facade. Just let me be if one day you're bored and happen to pass by and see my corpse. he remarked nonchalantly. Remember to buy me a coffin. And don't forget to burn plenty of paper money for me. Chinya raised an eyebrow, smirking coldly. Chinya truly understands me. Shusheng felt a sense of comfort. Pa! Chinya nearly retched at his audacity. Who understood him? Wasn't it merely because he kept harping on about burning paper money? The two of them continued to disregard the events of the day, each pretending to be calm. Shusheng observed Chinya's placid demeanor, searching in vain for any hint of shyness or anger directed at him, ultimately feeling dejected and burying his face in his pillow. Shedding silent tears, was it because he was so thin that he held no allure whatsoever? Shusheng felt despondent. Chinya watched him coldly, noting that he didn't even lift his head, not sparing her a glance, clearly revealing his indifferent nature. Suddenly, a few drops of water dripped from above, interrupting her thoughts and building ire. Touching her forehead, Chinya looked up, only to hear a downpour within the room. Luckily, she had moved quickly, or she would have been drenched. Outside, the rain fell in torrents, while inside, it lightly drizzled. Hey, scholar, can't you fix this house? Chinya was on the verge of losing her mind. Water was leaking everywhere, except for the spot on Shusheng's bed. We can't even afford a meal, let alone repair the house. Shusheng, however, lay comfortably, reclining on the bed with his legs crossed, observing Chinya dodging the raindrops. Patting the edge of the bed, he generously offered, "I'll share half with you." Looking around, the house itself was quite well built, with stone slabs on the floor and walls constructed from evenly sized stones. What is this? Chinya crouched down, pointing at a gap and asking. Doesn't tea look like lime, does it? It's a mixture of glutinous rice juice and lime. Shusheng leaned over the bed, enthusiastically explaining. First, sprinkle a layer of medicinal powder, then lay the stone slabs, and finally sprinkle another type of powder in the gaps, finishing with a pour of glutinous rice juice and lime. Don't be fooled by the dilapidated state of my courtyard. There are absolutely no bugs. Shusheng boasted a little. Oh. Chinya nodded in understanding. So, you're afraid of bugs. Who said that? I'm just informing you. Shusheng retorted weakly, his conviction clearly lacking. I'm quite curious. Chinya stood by his bed, gazing at the ceiling, counting the 7 leaks, large and small. Can anyone actually live here? You'd think with such a fine structure, they wouldn't skimp on the roof. Indeed, they're fooling those who wear human skins but are far scarier than ghosts. Shusheng chuckled lightly, sitting cross-legged on the bed, staring vacantly at the leaky ceiling. My mother feared bugs and was quite timid. So when this house was built, my father invested a lot of effort. Chinya looked around. Aside from a bed, there was a round table and a few chairs, nothing else at all. Realizing she had inadvertently touched on a sensitive subject, Chinya awkwardly changed the topic. Tomorrow, I'll help you fix it. You can repair houses, Shusheng replied, astonished. I can't handle complex repairs, but I can manage the leaks. She flashed a toothy smile, illuminating the dim, damp room like a luminous pearl in the night. It was truly delightful. He chuckled softly, tightening the blanket around himself. Chinya discerned that something was amiss in his voice and hurried over, only to find his forehead burning with fever. With a sudden thud, Shusheng collapsed, and Chinya swiftly turned him over. Discovering bloodstains where he had been seated, with an injury to your backside, can't you lie down properly? She exclaimed in exasperation. Shusheng nudged her arm, mumbling incoherently, I wanted to see you. Chinya was taken aback, biting her lip as his heavy breaths mingled with the pattering rain outside, stirring a complex whirl of emotions within her, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. What is this? Shusheng, eyes closed, felt a pill being shoved into his mouth and mumbled, You're not finally tired of me and planning to silence me, are you? I wouldn't engage in such a losing venture. If I were poisoned, you'd have to bury me and burn paper money as well. Yes, just that I can't bear it. I simply can't. Shusheng chuckled lightly, but suddenly winced, exclaiming, So bitter. Very bitter. Chinya asked him. I'll fetch you a glass of water. No need. I in the darkness. He fixed his gaze on her and said in a husky voice, It's not that dramatic, Dotto. Chinya averted her head, feeling her cheeks flush, despite knowing he couldn't see her. For a fleeting moment, she thought he might say, Just give me a kiss, and that will suffice. Was it truly her thoughts that were unhealthy? Chinya pondered seriously whether she ought to find someone to marry. Thus, they spent the night, one lying down, the other seated, by dawn. They both awoke with aching backs, unaware that others might think they had enjoyed a rather indulgent evening. The next morning, Shusheng gazed at her with a conflicted expression, prompting Chinya to ask, "Speak your mind. Stop staring at me like that, it's unsettling." She exaggeratedly rubbed her arms. "I need to relieve myself. Can you assist me? Is it really necessary to be so troubled over something so simple?" Chinya muttered, "No, what I meant was, I need you to help me apply some medicine because I can't reach." Shusheng turned his back to her, presenting his backside. "Get away!" Chinya scolded, initially thinking he had changed his demeanor. It turned out he was merely biding his time. "Just apply the medicine the way you did yesterday." "I didn't apply any medicine yesterday," Shusheng lamented. "I intended to let nature take its course, but since you're here, just help me with the medicine." "I refuse." "Oh, then let it fester." "Who is to blame for my misfortune?" Shusheng replied nonchalantly. Chinya felt an urge to strangle him, glaring fiercely, while Shusheng defiantly glared back. After a standoff of mutual glares, Chinya finally conceded that she might owe him this, resigning herself to fetch some warm water. "Ouch!" Shusheng inhaled sharply. "Heroin, be gentle. I'm made of flesh. Just treat it like it's already rotten." "It'll need to be scraped off anyway," Chinya retorted, her face flushed but her tone steady. She meticulously cleaned the bloodstains and applied the herbal ointment, the verdant salve bringing him a refreshing relief as the sharp, needle-like pain gradually subsided. Shusheng let out a contented hum, startling Chinya into nearly dropping him. "You can't be serious," he lamented, covering his head as he gazed at her. "Don't let old injuries heal only to add new ones. Who told you to make such strange noises?" Chinya muttered before tossing her sleeves aside and exiting. "Hey, aren't you supposed to fix my roof?" Shusheng called after her anxiously, as the room filled with water, resembling a flood. Straining, he bent down to scoop out the accumulated water when suddenly, a delightful aroma wafted through the air. Dumplings? The scent was simply irresistible. Glancing up, he spotted Chinya squatting on a beam, munching on a dumpling, her cheeks puffed out like a chubby squirrel. "Heroin, this is too much," Shusheng protested. "Here." Chinya leaped down, handing him a package of dumplings. He eagerly accepted, taking a bite, then gazing longingly at her dumplings. "Red bean paste dumplings. I'm not that picky." "Who said that? There are also vegetable dumplings." "Weren't you supposed to avoid those?" Chinya replied, taking a bite of her dumpling. The juices bursting forth, filling the air with an appetizing scent. "Oh right, he needs to avoid certain foods." Thus, Shusheng watched her relish the meat dumplings with delight, his appetite dwindling as he struggled with the bland vegetable dumplings. "Woe is me, I crave meat," he sighed. "Heroin, can you be lenient just this once?" Chinya, her mouth smeared with oil, shook her head resolutely. "Heroin, be a bit generous." Shusheng nearly clung to her leg in desperation. Chinya smacked her lips and said, "Next time. I've only got one left." With that, she took a hearty bite. Shusheng watched in dismay as she savored the meat, urgently grasping her hand. "I'm not picky. Just give it to me." Chinya froze, and before she knew it, half of the dumpling was snatched away by Shusheng, who stuffed it into his mouth, eyes squinting in bliss. "So delicious." Chinya poked him. "Haven't you been eating properly lately?" Shusheng's eyes widened like a startled rabbit. "How did you know?" "Your complexion makes it obvious. You've finally gained a bit of weight at the temple, and in just a few days, you've become gone again. Let us go. Today, I shall lend my aid." She rolled up her sleeves, ready for action. Behind her, Shusheng watched, a warm smile creeping across his face as he chewed on his vegetable dumpling. Such a wonderful girl is becoming increasingly rare. He secretly pondered how to win her over. Outside, the rain had ceased, and the sun shone brilliantly. Chinya stood atop the roof, puzzled. "Why does that building have tiled roofing? If you'd like, I could help you move those tiles over here," she suggested. The Shu family had 4 houses. One main house where Shusheng's parents once lived, one side room where Shusheng currently resided, another side room for storage, and across from it were the kitchen and woodshed, evidence of meticulous construction. Likely due to generous funding. Shusheng glanced at the direction she pointed, shaking his head vigorously. "No, you must not covet that house." "Why not?" Chinya asked, puzzled. The roof of that house was securely covered, while the others were merely hastily thatched. "That's my study. If you tear it down, all my books will be ruined by water." "Absolutely not." "How pretentious." Chinya scoffed in the end. After Shushing's repeated protests, they left the roof undisturbed and Chinya laid a thick layer of thatch over it, securing it before preparing to leave.